They said the kiss saved her life. They said the ex-con was a hero. But what they didn't know was that Charlotte Ashford's accident wasn't an accident at all, and the man who rescued her from the frozen Hudson River was about to become the only thing standing between the billionaire heiress and a killer who wanted her fortune. This is the story of Jake Morrison, a single father with a criminal past, who dove into icy water one winter night and surfaced into a conspiracy that would change everything. Stay until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The winter wind off the Hudson River cut through the December night like broken glass. Jake Morrison pulled his worn jacket tighter as he walked along the riverside path, his breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. It was 11:47 p.m., and he was late getting home to his daughter. Again. His shift at the warehouse had run over. The foreman always made him stay late, as if punishing him for sins already paid for. 12 years since his release, and the world still treated him like the stupid kid who'd gotten caught driving a getaway car for a robbery he didn't even know was happening. 12 years of groveling for minimum wage jobs, of watching other fathers pick up their kids from school in nice cars while he showed up on foot, of seeing that flicker of shame in his daughter Lily's eyes when her friends asked what her daddy did for a living. The path along the river was longer than cutting through downtown, but Jake preferred it. Fewer people. Fewer chances for someone to recognize him from that damn mugshot that still circulated online whenever someone Googled his name. Out here, in the dark, he was nobody. Just another shadow moving through the city. The George Washington Bridge loomed ahead, its lights reflecting off the black water like scattered diamonds. Traffic was light for a Friday night, just the occasional car humming across the span above. Jake checked his phone. 3 missed calls from Lily. His chest tightened with guilt. She was 14 now, old enough to stay home alone. But that didn't make it right. Didn't make him less of a failure as a father. He was typing out a text when he heard it. The screech of tires, the sickening crunch of metal against concrete. Then a sound he'd never forget for the rest of his life. The heavy splash of something massive hitting water. Jake's head snapped up. On the bridge approach, maybe 200 yards ahead, a black limousine had crashed through the guardrail. Its rear end jutted up at an angle, the front half already submerged in the river. The water churned white around it, and even from this distance, Jake could see the vehicle sinking fast. For a frozen moment, he couldn't move. His body remembered another night, another accident, the one that had sent him to prison. The crush of metal, the screaming, the blood on his hands that wouldn't wash off, no matter how hard he scrubbed. Then he heard it. Faint, barely audible over the wind and water, but unmistakable. Someone was screaming inside that car. "Call 911!" Jake shouted to no one in particular, already running. His phone clattered to the pavement as he sprinted toward the crash site, his work boots pounding against the frozen ground. Ahead, he could see other people now, a few drivers who'd stopped their cars standing by the broken guardrail with their phones out. Filming, recording, not one of them moving to help. "Somebody's in there!" Jake yelled as he reached the bridge. He didn't stop running, didn't hesitate. 12 years ago, he'd frozen when it mattered. He'd stood there like a coward while his friend bled out in the front seat, too scared to call for help, too stupid to know he was throwing his life away. Not this time. Jake hit the water at full speed. The cold was instantaneous and absolute. It wasn't like jumping into a pool. It was like being stabbed with 1,000 knives all at once. The river closed over his head, black and merciless, stealing the air from his lungs. For a terrifying second, Jake couldn't tell which way was up. His body seized, every muscle contracting against the cold. Drowning. He was drowning. No, move, swim. He kicked hard, his lungs burning, and broke the surface, gasping. The limousine was 15 feet away, nearly vertical now, its nose pointed at the river bottom like a sinking ship. The rear lights still glowed beneath the water, casting an eerie red glow. Jake could see movement inside, shadows thrashing against the windows. He swam. His arms felt like lead, his clothes dragging him down. But he swam. The current fought him, trying to pull him downstream, away from the sinking car. His fingers went numb. His jaw started to chatter so hard he thought his teeth would crack. But he kept swimming. When he reached the limo, it lurched deeper. Water was pouring through the broken front windshield, and Jake could see 2 shapes inside. The driver slumped forward against the steering wheel. And in the back, a woman with pale blonde hair pounding frantically against the rear window. Their eyes met through the glass. She was young, mid-20s maybe, wearing what looked like an expensive evening gown. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, her eyes wide with terror. The water was up to her chest and rising fast. Jake grabbed the door handle and pulled, locked. He yanked again, harder, but it didn't budge. The woman inside was screaming something, pointing at something Jake couldn't see. The water was at her shoulders now. She had seconds, maybe less. "Get back!" Jake shouted, though he knew she probably couldn't hear him through the glass and the water. He grabbed the antenna from the roof, already half submerged, and snapped it off. Using the metal base as a hammer, he slammed it against the window. Nothing. Again. Harder. The glass spiderwebbed. The woman's face went under. Jake saw her blonde hair floating around her head like seaweed, saw her hands still pushing against the window, weaker now. He hit the glass with everything he had. It shattered. Water rushed into the car with explosive force, and Jake was pushed back by the surge. When he recovered, the limo was gone, sunk completely beneath the surface. He dove. The underwater world was chaos, black and freezing and completely disorienting. Jake's eyes burned from the cold and the pollutants in the river, but he forced them open, searching for any sign of the woman. There, a flash of pale fabric. He kicked toward it, his lungs already screaming for air. His fingers closed around something solid, an arm. He pulled, wrapping his other arm around the woman's torso, and kicked upward with everything he had left. His vision was starting to tunnel. Black spots danced at the edges. His body was shutting down from the cold, from the oxygen deprivation, from the sheer impossibility of what he was trying to do. Lily. Lily needs you. Move. They broke the surface together. Jake gasped, sucking in air that burned his throat like fire. The woman's head lolled against his shoulder, unconscious or worse, he couldn't tell. She wasn't breathing. Oh God, she wasn't breathing. The shore was too far. Jake's arms wouldn't work right anymore. He was so cold he couldn't feel anything below his neck, and the current was pulling them both under. They were going to die. Both of them were going to die. Then he felt it. Wood against his hand, debris from the bridge, a chunk of broken guardrail floating past. Jake grabbed it with his one working hand, hooking his arm through the twisted metal, and used his last bit of strength to roll the woman onto the makeshift raft. Her lips were blue. Her skin was gray. "Come on," Jake muttered through chattering teeth. "Come on, come on, come on." He pulled himself halfway onto the debris, positioning the woman's head above water, and started pushing toward shore. His legs kicked weakly, barely propelling them forward. Above, on the bridge, he could see lights now, red and blue flashing, emergency vehicles, people shouting, but they were too far away and the woman had stopped moving completely. The shore seemed impossible. A mile away, though it was probably only 50 yards. Jake's vision kept fading in and out. Hypothermia was setting in. He knew the signs: confusion, exhaustion, the overwhelming urge to just stop fighting and let the water take him. It would be so easy, so peaceful. No, not while she still has a chance. When Jake's feet finally touched the rocky bottom, he almost didn't register it. His body was beyond pain now, beyond cold. Just numb and distant, like he was watching himself from far away. He dragged the woman onto the frozen shore, her body limp and heavy, and immediately started chest compressions. "No, no, no!" he gasped, his arm shaking as he pushed down on her sternum. 1, 2, 3. She was so still. Her elegant face was peaceful, like she was just sleeping, like death was a gentle thing. "Don't you die on me. Not after all that." Around them, a crowd was gathering. Jake was dimly aware of people running down from the bridge, of someone throwing a blanket over his shoulders, of voices shouting about ambulances and police. But all he could see was the woman's blue lips. All he could hear was the absence of her breath. 30 compressions. He tilted her head back, pinched her nose, and pressed his mouth to hers. He'd taken a CPR class years ago, right after Lily was born. It was one of those things they offered for free at the community center. And Jake had gone because he was terrified of everything that could go wrong with a baby, terrified of failing as a father before he'd even really started. He'd practiced on a plastic dummy that didn't look or feel anything like a real person, and he'd honestly thought he'd never need to use it. He breathed into her, once, twice, switched back to compressions. "Sir, let us—" A paramedic was suddenly there, trying to take over, but Jake shoved him away. "I got her," he growled. "I'm not giving up." He pressed his mouth to hers again, breathed. "Please, please work." The woman convulsed. River water spewed from her mouth as she coughed, her body curling on its side. Her eyes flew open, brilliant green, wide with panic and confusion. She sucked in a ragged breath, then another, her chest heaving. "You're okay," Jake heard himself saying, though his voice sounded strange and far away. "You're okay now. You're safe." Her eyes found his. For a moment, in the chaos of sirens and shouting and camera flashes from what seemed like 100 phones, they just looked at each other. She was alive. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. Then Jake's vision went sideways, and the world disappeared. He woke up in an ambulance, wrapped in what felt like a dozen heated blankets, an oxygen mask over his face. A paramedic was checking his vitals, looking concerned. "Welcome back," the paramedic said. "You had us worried there. Core temperature was down to 92 degrees. Another few minutes and—" He didn't finish the sentence. "The woman," Jake rasped, his throat raw. "Is she—" "She's alive, thanks to you." The paramedic smiled. "They're taking her to Presbyterian. You saved her life, man. That was the bravest damn thing I've ever seen." Jake closed his eyes. Relief washed over him, so intense it hurt. She was alive. The relief was followed immediately by a different feeling, dread. Because Jake knew what came next. The news crews he'd seen on the bridge, the phones recording everything. His face would be everywhere by morning. And when they dug into who he was, when they found that mugshot— "Is there someone we should call?" the paramedic asked. "Family?" "My daughter," Jake managed. "Lily, my phone. Lost in the river, I'm afraid. But we can get you to a phone at the hospital. What's her number?" Jake recited it from memory, the one number he'd never forget. The paramedic made the call and a moment later handed him the ambulance's phone. "Dad?" Lily's voice was small and scared. "Dad, where are you? I saw— on the news they said someone jumped off the bridge into the river and I thought—" "I'm okay, baby." Jake's voice cracked. "I'm okay. I'll be home soon." "They're saying it was you, Dad. Tell me you didn't—" "I had to, Lily. Someone needed help." There was a long silence. Then, "Of course you did." She sounded so tired, so resigned, like this was just another example of her father making her life harder, drawing attention they couldn't afford. "The TV is showing your face. People are already commenting. They found the old articles." Jake's heart sank. "I'm sorry. Just come home, Dad. Please, just come home." The call ended. Jake handed the phone back, staring up at the ambulance ceiling. What had he done? He'd saved a life, yes, but at what cost? Lily was already bullied at school because of his record. The other kids called her Khan's daughter, made jokes about prison stripes and orange jumpsuits. Last year, she'd begged him to lie about his job at the parent-teacher conference, to pretend he was something more than a warehouse loader with a felony record. And now this. Now everyone would know exactly who Jake Morrison was. At the hospital, they kept him for observation, treated him for hypothermia and exhaustion. A police officer came to take his statement, and Jake told him everything: the crash, the dive, the rescue. The officer's expression was carefully neutral, but Jake caught him glancing at his phone more than once, checking Jake's background probably, confirming what kind of man had played hero tonight. It was almost 4 a.m. when they finally released him. A nurse gave him borrowed scrubs to wear since his clothes were ruined, and a social worker pressed a card into his hand, some kind of victim's assistance program, though Jake wasn't sure why. He was fine, just tired. He was heading toward the exit when he heard a commotion down the hall. Raised voices, the click of expensive shoes on linoleum. "I don't care about hospital policy," a woman's voice rang out, clear and commanding despite a slight rasp. "I was told the man who saved my life is here, and I'm going to thank him." "Ms. Ashford, you should be resting. I died tonight and came back. I think I can walk down a hallway." Jake turned. Coming toward him was the woman from the river, now wrapped in a hospital gown and robe, her blonde hair damp but brushed back from her face. She was flanked by two men in suits who looked like security and a harried doctor trying to keep up. She stopped when she saw him. Her green eyes, clearer now, more focused, locked onto his. "You," she breathed. Up close, without the panic and terror of drowning, Jake could see how beautiful she was. Not in the airbrushed, distant way of magazine covers, but in a way that was somehow more real. The kind of face that made you understand why ancient civilizations had started wars. But it was her eyes that held him, intelligent and intense, studying him like he was a puzzle she was determined to solve. "I'm Charlotte," she said, stepping forward and extending her hand. "Charlotte Ashford." Jake took her hand automatically. Her skin was warm now, no longer the deathly cold of the river. "Jake Morrison. Jake Morrison." She repeated his name like she was committing it to memory. "You saved my life. I did what anyone would do." "No." Her grip on his hand tightened. "You did what no one else did. There were people on that bridge, Jake. Dozens of them. With their phones out, recording, but not one of them jumped in. You did. Why?" The question caught him off guard. Someone was drowning. You could have died. That water was freezing. The car was sinking. Any reasonable person would have waited for emergency services. Jake pulled his hand back, suddenly uncomfortable with the intensity of her gaze. "I'm not good at being reasonable, I guess." A small smile touched her lips. "Thank God for that." She turned to one of the security men. "Marcus, get his information. Address, phone number, bank account details." "That's not necessary," Jake interrupted. "I'm giving you a reward. A substantial one. You saved my life. I don't want your money." Charlotte's eyebrows rose. Behind her, the security men exchanged glances. Clearly, people didn't usually turn down money from Charlotte Ashford. "Everyone wants money," she said flatly. "Not for this." Jake met her eyes. "I'm glad you're okay. That's enough." "Jake, I have to go. My daughter's waiting." He turned toward the exit, then paused. "What happened to this driver? The man in the front seat?" Charlotte's expression shifted, the commanding confidence faltering for just a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "Thomas didn't make it. He was..." She swallowed hard. "He was dead before we hit the water. Heart attack, they think." Jake nodded slowly. He'd suspected as much when he saw the man slumped over the wheel. Still, hearing it confirmed made his chest ache. He'd saved one life tonight, but couldn't save them both. "I'm sorry." "So am I. He'd been with my family for 20 years. Charlotte's eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears back with the same fierce control she seemed to apply to everything else. "Which is why I need to repay you. Thomas had family, a wife, kids. I'll make sure they're taken care of. And I want to take care of you too. I'm not your responsibility." "Maybe not. But letting you walk away without properly thanking you feels wrong." She pulled out her phone. Somehow she already had a new one, and looked at him expectantly. "At least let me have your number. In case, I don't know, in case you change your mind, or in case I ever need someone brave enough to jump into a frozen river again." Despite everything, Jake felt a small smile tug at his lips. If you make a habit of driving into rivers, you need better security. Noted. Her phone was still extended. "Please?" Jake sighed and recited the number. He told himself it didn't matter. Someone like Charlotte Ashford wouldn't actually call. This was just rich people manners, the social equivalent of saying, "Let's do lunch sometime," with no intention of following through. She'd go back to her billionaire life, and he'd go back to his warehouse shifts and his tiny apartment. Their worlds had collided for one strange night, but by morning, everything would return to normal. Except it wouldn't, and Jake knew it. "Take care of yourself, Charlotte Ashford," he said, and walked out of the hospital before she could say anything else. The winter dawn was just breaking as Jake stepped outside. The city was that strange gray color of early morning, not quite night and not quite day. He had no phone, no wallet, no keys, just hospital scrubs and a borrowed jacket from the nurse's station. He'd have to walk the 3 miles home, in December, in paper-thin clothing. Well, he'd survived worse tonight. He was 2 blocks from the hospital when he saw the newspaper stand. The vendor was just setting up, pulling out the morning edition and displaying it in the window. Jake stopped dead. His face was on the front page. Not a flattering photo. It showed him on the riverbank, soaking wet and wild-eyed, giving mouth to Charlotte. The headline screamed in bold letters, "Ex-con hero saves billionaire heiress." And below that, in smaller print, Jake Morrison, convicted getaway driver, dives into Hudson to rescue Charlotte Ashford. His mugshot was in a smaller box next to the main photo, 12 years younger, scared and angry and stupid. The face of the kid who'd thrown his life away for nothing. Jake's stomach turned to ice. They'd found out. Of course they'd found out. It had probably taken one reporter about 30 seconds to run his name through a database, and now it was out there for everyone to see, for Lily's classmates to see, for his boss to see, for every judgmental parent at Lily's school to see. He was trending on Twitter by the time he got home. Hashtag ex-con hero. Hashtag Hudson rescue. Hashtag Jake Morrison. Thousands of comments, some calling him a hero, others calling him a criminal who didn't deserve praise, still others debating whether his past negated his present actions. A few creative trolls had already made memes. Lily was sitting on the couch when he walked in, her laptop open, her face pale. She looked up at him with those eyes, so much like her mother's, and Jake saw it there. Not pride, not relief that he was safe, shame. "You made it worse," she said quietly. "Lily, they're everywhere, Dad. The comments, the posts. People from school are sharing them. Madison texted me a link to your mugshot with a bunch of laughing emojis." Her voice cracked. "Why did you have to be a hero? Why couldn't you just not?" The words hit harder than the frozen river. Jake stood in the doorway of their tiny apartment, dripping on the worn carpet, and had no answer. Because what could he say? That he'd saved a woman's life? That seemed less important than the humiliation he'd brought on his daughter. Again. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Lily closed her laptop and stood up. She walked past him toward her bedroom, not meeting his eyes. At the door she paused. "Mom would have been proud," she said. "That's something, I guess." Then she closed the door and Jake was alone. He showered until the hot water ran out, but he couldn't get warm. Couldn't stop seeing Charlotte's blue face. Thomas slumped over the wheel. The flash of camera phones recording his failure to be anonymous. Couldn't stop hearing the resignation in Lily's voice. His phone, his new phone, delivered by some hospital service he didn't remember signing up for, buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Thank you. For everything. The offer stands. Whatever you need." CA, Jake deleted it. Charlotte Ashford was grateful now, but gratitude faded. Give it a week, maybe 2, and she'd forget all about the warehouse worker who'd pulled her from the Hudson. The media attention would die down. Life would return to normal, or something close to it. He lay down on his worn couch and closed his eyes, trying to will away the exhaustion. But every time he started to drift off, he was back in that black water, fighting the current, watching Charlotte's eyes close as she went under. He'd saved her life. He knew that. He'd done something good, something real. So why did he feel like he was drowning all over again? Sleep didn't come. Jake lay on the couch, watching the ceiling fan rotate slowly, his mind replaying the crash in an endless loop. Every time he closed his eyes, he was back underwater, his lungs burning, Charlotte's lifeless body in his arms. At some point, exhaustion won, and he drifted into a fitful half-sleep filled with drowning nightmares and the sound of metal crunching against concrete. The knock on the door came at 9:47 a.m., sharp and authoritative, the kind of knock that said whoever was on the other side wasn't going away. Jake dragged himself off the couch, his muscles screaming in protest. Everything hurt. His shoulders ached from swimming against the current. His chest was bruised from where he'd braced against the sinking limo. Even his jaw hurt from the violent shivering that had racked his body for hours after the rescue. He opened the door and stopped breathing. Charlotte Ashford stood in the hallway of his run-down apartment building, looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine spread. She wore a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than Jake's monthly rent, her blonde hair styled in soft waves, minimal makeup that somehow made her look more beautiful than the full glam of the hospital. Behind her stood one of the security men from last night, and a woman in a business suit carrying a leather briefcase. For a moment, nobody spoke. Charlotte's eyes traveled past Jake into the apartment, taking in the cramped space, the worn furniture, the water stain on the ceiling from the leak upstairs that the landlord never fixed. Jake saw his home through her eyes and felt shame burn through him. "Ms. Ashford," he finally managed, "what are you doing here?" "You wouldn't give me your address, so I had someone find it." She said it matter-of-factly, like having people tracked down was a normal part of her Tuesday morning. "May I come in?" Jake became acutely aware that he was wearing sweatpants and a threadbare t-shirt that he hadn't shaved, that his apartment smelled like old coffee and whatever Lily had burned trying to make dinner last night. "I don't think that's a good idea." "I brought coffee." Charlotte held up a carrier with 4 cups. "And breakfast. And someone I'd like you to meet." She nodded toward the woman with the briefcase. "This is Margaret Chen, my attorney." "Your attorney?" Jake's guard went up immediately. People like Charlotte Ashford didn't bring lawyers for friendly visits. "Look, if this is about liability or you're worried I'm going to sue—" "Jake," Charlotte's voice softened, "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to thank you properly. Please, 5 minutes." Against his better judgment, Jake stepped aside. Charlotte walked in with the kind of confidence that came from never doubting she belonged anywhere. Her security guard remained in the hallway. Margaret Chen followed Charlotte inside, her expression professionally neutral. "This is nice," Charlotte said, and Jake almost laughed at the transparent lie. But when he looked at her face, she seemed sincere. "Cozy. My penthouse has 17 rooms, and most nights I can't stand being in it. Too much space for one person." "My daughter and I make it work." Jake closed the door. "She's still asleep. Her room's right there. So maybe we could keep our voices down?" Charlotte nodded and set the coffee carrier on the small kitchen table. She opened one of the pastry bags, revealing croissants and Danish that looked too perfect to eat. "I wasn't sure what you liked, so I got a variety." Jake remained standing, arms crossed. "Why are you really here?" Charlotte exchanged a glance with her attorney, then pulled out a chair and sat down. She gestured for Jake to join her, and after a long moment he did. "Yesterday, you saved my life," Charlotte began. "And then you walked away like it was nothing. Do you know how rare that is? How rare you are." "I'm not rare, I'm just broke, I'm guessing." She said it without cruelty, just stating a fact. "Your apartment speaks for itself. The warehouse uniform I saw pictures of you wearing online, this building." She gestured around. "You're struggling, Jake, and yet you turned down my offer of money." Jake's jaw tightened. "I don't need your pity." "It's not pity, it's gratitude." Charlotte leaned forward, her green eyes intense. "Margaret, show him." The attorney opened her briefcase and pulled out a document. She slid it across the table to Jake. He picked it up, scanning the legal language, until he reached a number that made his heart stop. $50,000. "That's insane," Jake breathed. "That's nothing," Charlotte countered. "My life is worth considerably more than $50,000, Jake." But my accountant advised me to start with what he called a reasonable amount. The check is already written. All you have to do is accept it. Jake pushed the document back across the table like it was radioactive. "I told you I don't want your money." "Why not? And don't give me some noble speech about doing the right thing. You have a daughter to support. This money could change your lives." "That's exactly why I can't take it." Jake stood up, pacing the small kitchen. "You think I don't know what people will say? Ex-con saves rich woman, gets paid off. They'll say I staged it. They'll say I pushed your car off that bridge just so I could play hero and collect a reward. They already think I'm garbage, Ms. Ashford. I'm not going to prove them right." Charlotte studied him for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "I read about your case. The robbery 13 years ago. You were 19, driving for a friend you thought was going to a job site. You didn't know he was going to rob a check-cashing place until he came running out with a gun." Jake's hands clenched into fists. "You don't know anything about it. I know you took a plea deal to protect that friend. I know you served 6 years in Attica. I know your girlfriend, Lily's mother, died while you were inside. Overdose. And I know you've spent the last 12 years trying to be someone your daughter can be proud of." Charlotte's eyes never left his face. "Am I wrong?" The anger drained out of Jake, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. "How did you find all that out?" "I have resources, And after what you did for me, I wanted to understand who you are." She stood up, moving closer but maintaining a respectful distance. "You're not garbage, Jake. You made a mistake when you were barely an adult, and you've paid for it every day since. But last night you were a hero, and heroes shouldn't have to worry about making rent." "Dad?" They both turned. Lily stood in her bedroom doorway, wearing pajamas and rubbing sleep from her eyes. Her gaze moved from Jake to Charlotte to the attorney, and her expression shifted from confusion to recognition to something like horror. "You're her," Lily whispered. "The woman from the news." Charlotte smiled warmly. "I am. You must be Lily. I'm Charlotte Ashford. Your father saved my life." Lily looked at Jake, and he saw the question in her eyes. "What did you do now? How much worse is this going to get?" "Ms. Ashford was just leaving," Jake said firmly. "Actually, I was hoping to talk to you too, Lily." Charlotte pulled out another chair at the table. "Would you sit with me for a minute?" "I don't think," Jake started, but Lily was already moving forward, drawn by curiosity or teenage boldness, or maybe just the surreal novelty of having a billionaire in her kitchen. "What do you want to talk about?" Lily sat down, eyeing the pastries hungrily but not reaching for them. "Eat," Charlotte encouraged, pushing the bag toward her. "They're from this little French bakery in Tribeca, best croissants in the city." She waited until Lily took one before continuing. "I wanted to thank you too, because your father being the kind of man who jumps into frozen rivers to save strangers, that didn't happen by accident. He's that man because he has someone worth being that man for. You." Lily's eyes widened slightly. Jake felt his throat tighten. "I know the last 24 hours have been hard for you," Charlotte continued. "Seeing his face on the news again, the old stories being dragged up. People at school probably aren't being kind." "How did you—" Lily glanced at Jake. "Because people are never kind when they should be." Charlotte's voice carried a weight of personal experience. "But here's what I want you to know. Your father is one of the bravest people I've ever met. And I've met presidents and war heroes and surgeons who operate on babies' hearts. None of them would have done what he did last night. Most people are cowards when it really matters. Your dad isn't." Lily looked down at her croissant, blinking hard. Jake wanted to interrupt, to shield her from whatever emotion was building in her chest, but Charlotte caught his eye and gave a tiny shake of her head. "I'm trying to give him money to thank him," Charlotte said, $50,000, "but he won't take it. Something about pride and not wanting people to talk. Do you know what I think?" Lily shook her head. "I think he's being stubborn and stupid." Charlotte said it with a small smile that took some of the edge off the words. "I think he's so worried about what other people think that he's willing to keep struggling just to prove he's not after anything, and I think that's ridiculous. So I'm asking you, Lily, do you want him to take the money?" The question hung in the air. Jake opened his mouth to object, but Lily spoke first. "Will it make things worse?" Her voice was small, younger than 14. "If he takes it?" Charlotte considered this seriously. "Some people will judge no matter what. But those people have already made up their minds about your father. They decided who he was 13 years ago, and nothing he does will change that. So the question isn't what they'll think. The question is whether this money could help you and your dad have a better life." "We need it," Lily admitted, so quietly Jake almost didn't hear. "Dad works 14-hour days, and we're still behind on bills. I can't play basketball this year because we couldn't afford the team fees, and the apartment is—" She trailed off, embarrassed. Jake felt like he'd been punched in the gut. He'd known they were struggling, but hearing Lily say it out loud to a stranger, admitting the poverty he'd subjected her to, was unbearable. "Then it's settled." Charlotte pulled the check from Margaret's briefcase and set it on the table. "This is for Lily's future, for basketball fees and college applications and everything else she deserves. Not a reward or a payment. A gift from someone who gets to have a future because of your father." She stood up, smoothing her expensive coat. Margaret began packing up her briefcase. The matter apparently concluded. "I can't accept this," Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was looking at Lily, at the hope dawning in her eyes, at the possibility of giving her something better than this apartment with its water-stained ceiling and broken heater. "You can, and you will." Charlotte moved toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Jake? One more thing. Thomas, my driver. He has a family, a wife, Elizabeth, and 2 kids in college. I'm taking care of them financially, but Elizabeth asked if she could meet you. The man who tried to save her husband. Would you be willing?" The weight of it pressed down on Jake's chest. The driver. The man whose life he couldn't save. I didn't get to him in time. You tried. In that moment, you tried to save both of us. That means something to her, to me too. Charlotte's hand rested on the doorknob. Think about it. And think about the money. You have 48 hours before the check expires. After that, I'll have Margaret draw up another one. I can do this all year if necessary. I'm very persistent when I want to be. Why? Jake asked suddenly. Why do you care this much? You don't know me. Charlotte turned back, and for the first time since she'd arrived, her composed mask cracked just slightly. Because when I was underwater, when everything was going dark, I prayed for someone to help me. And you came. You actually came. In a world where most people won't even help someone change a tire, you dove into a frozen river for a complete stranger. That kind of person deserves better than what life has given you. So yes, I care. Deal with it. She walked out, Margaret and the security guard following. The door clicked shut, leaving Jake and Lily alone with a check for $50,000 sitting on their kitchen table like a small miracle. Lily picked it up, her hands shaking slightly. Dad, this is real. I know. This could change everything. I know. So why do you look like someone died? Jake sat down heavily, his head in his hands. Because nothing's free, Lily. People like Charlotte Ashford don't just give away money. There's always strings attached. Maybe she's just a good person who wants to help. Maybe. But Jake had learned the hard way that good intentions from rich people often came with complications. Still, he looked at his daughter holding that check like it was made of starlight, and he thought about her missing basketball season, about the college applications she'd have to skip because they couldn't afford the fees, about the future he was supposed to give her but couldn't. What do you want to do? Lily asked. It was the first time in a long time she'd asked his opinion like it mattered, like she trusted him to make the right choice. Jake looked at the check, looked at his daughter, thought about Charlotte's eyes underwater, about the life he'd given back to her, about whether accepting gratitude for doing the right thing made him a hero or just another guy taking advantage of the wealthy. I don't know, he admitted. I really don't know. The next 2 days were surreal. The story wouldn't die. News vans camped outside their apartment building. Reporters shouted questions whenever Jake left for work. TMZ ran a piece titled, From Con to Hero, The Redemption of Jake Morrison. Good Morning America wanted an interview. Someone started a GoFundMe that raised $12,000 before Jake found out and asked them to shut it down. Through it all, the check sat on their kitchen table, uncashed. Jake would look at it before leaving for his warehouse shift, and again when he came home. $50,000. A new life. But at what cost? His boss at the warehouse called him into the office on Wednesday. Morrison. Frank Delgado was a hard man who'd made it clear from day one that he was only hiring Jake as a favor to a mutual acquaintance. We need to talk. Jake had been expecting this. I can explain the media attention. It won't affect my work. It already has. Frank gestured to the window overlooking the warehouse floor. Half my crew is watching videos of you on their phones instead of loading trucks. Customers are asking about you. I've got reporters calling about your inspiring story of redemption or some shit. This is a business, not a reality show. I understand. I'll talk to the guys, tell them to focus on work. That's not the problem. Frank leaned back in his chair, studying Jake with an unreadable expression. The problem is you've become a liability. Or maybe an asset. I'm not sure which yet. Jake's stomach sank. Are you firing me? No, but I'm offering you something different. We're expanding the operation, opening a new facility in Jersey. I need a supervisor, someone who knows the work, can manage a crew, handle logistics, pays $32 an hour plus benefits. I was going to hire from outside, but then you went and became famous. Frank's mouth quirked in something almost like a smile. Good PR, having a hero on the management team, shows we believe in second chances and all that corporate responsibility bullshit. Jake stared at him. You're offering me a promotion because I saved someone? I'm offering you a promotion because you're good at your job and you showed up every day for 3 years without complaining. The hero thing is just convenient timing. Frank pushed a folder across the desk. Job description, salary details, benefits package. Think about it. I need an answer by Friday. Jake took the folder in a daze. $32 an hour. Benefits. A title that wasn't warehouse loader. It felt like the universe was conspiring to reward him for one good deed, except Jake knew the universe didn't work that way. The universe wasn't fair. It didn't balance the scales. So why did it feel like his life was suddenly shifting towards something better? He went home early, his mind spinning. Lily was at school. The apartment was quiet except for the radiator's labored hissing. Jake sat at the kitchen table and opened the folder Frank had given him, reading through the job description, the salary breakdown, the health insurance details. With this job and Charlotte's money, they could move. Get a real apartment in a safer neighborhood. Lily could play basketball, could apply to good colleges, could have the life she deserved. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Elizabeth Reyes, Thomas's wife. Charlotte gave me your number. I'd like to meet you if you're willing. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., St. Francis Chapel on 32nd Street? Please, I need to say thank you to the man who tried to save my husband. Jake's hands shook as he typed back. I'll be there. Because if he was going to accept Charlotte's money, if he was going to take this promotion and let his life change because of one night in a frozen river, then he owed it to Thomas Reyes to face his widow, to admit that he'd failed to save one life while saving another. That night, Jake cashed the check. St. Francis Chapel was a small, quiet space tucked between a deli and a dry cleaner. Jake arrived early, sitting in a back pew, and trying to remember the last time he'd been in a church. Lily's baptism? Maybe. Sarah had insisted, even though neither of them were particularly religious. It seemed important at the time, like they were protecting their daughter with ceremony and holy water. Sarah. God, he hadn't let himself think about her in years. It hurt too much. The memories of who she'd been before the drugs, before the depression swallowed her whole, before he went to prison and she faced motherhood alone. The officers who'd told him she was gone had been kind in that professional, detached way. Overdose. Quick, probably painless. Lily had been with Sarah's sister. She was safe. But Sarah wasn't. And Jake had been locked in a cage, unable to comfort his dying girlfriend, unable to raise his daughter, unable to do anything except lift weights in the yard and hate himself. Jake Morrison? He looked up. A woman in her 50s stood in the aisle, her dark hair streaked with gray, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. She wore a simple black dress and carried a rosary. Mrs. Reyes. Jake stood awkwardly. Thank you for meeting me. Elizabeth, please. She slid into the pew beside him. For a moment, neither spoke. The chapel's silence pressed down on them, heavy with grief and unspoken words. Charlotte told me what you did. How you tried to get Thomas out, too. I should have gotten to him first, should have. He was already gone, Jake. Elizabeth's voice was steady, like she'd accepted this truth and made peace with it. The autopsy showed a massive heart attack. He was dead before the car hit the water. You couldn't have saved him. The words should have brought relief, but they didn't. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Don't be. Elizabeth turned to look at him fully, and Jake saw a strength in her eyes that reminded him of Charlotte. Thomas spent 20 years protecting the Ashford family. He took that job seriously, and on his last night, he got Charlotte to safety even while he was dying. That's who he was. A protector, just like you. I'm nothing like... You jumped into freezing water to save strangers. You risked your life without hesitation. Thomas would have respected that. She reached out and took Jake's hand. Her skin was warm, her grip firm. My husband is gone. Nothing changes that. But Charlotte is alive because of you. And that matters, Jake. It matters to me, to our children, to everyone who loves her. So please, don't carry guilt over something you couldn't control. Thomas wouldn't want that. A tear slid down Jake's cheek before he could stop it. He'd been holding everything in for days, the fear, the exhaustion, the crushing weight of being called a hero when he felt like a failure. Elizabeth's absolution cracked something open inside him. I took her money, he confessed. Charlotte's. She offered $50,000 and I took it, Does that make me human? Elizabeth smiled sadly. Jake, you're allowed to accept help. You're allowed to let good things happen to you. I don't know what your life has been like, but I can guess from the way you carry yourself. Like you're waiting for permission to take up space in the world. You don't need permission. You earned it the moment you dove into that river. And they sat together in the quiet chapel, two people bound by tragedy and survival. Eventually, Elizabeth pulled a photograph from her purse and showed it to Jake. Thomas in his driver's uniform, smiling broadly, his arm around Elizabeth's shoulders. They looked happy, in love. He was a good man, Jake said. So are you. Elizabeth tucked the photo away. Charlotte thinks so too. She called me yesterday, talked for an hour about you, about your daughter, your struggles, how impressed she was by your integrity. She's not used to people saying no to her. Jake almost smiled. I noticed. She wants to help you, Jake, and I think you should let her. Thomas would have wanted that too. He believed in second chances. Hell, he gave me one. At Jake's questioning look, she explained, I was a mess when we met. Single mother, working 3 jobs, barely keeping my head above water. Thomas saw something in me worth fighting for. He was patient and kind, and he never made me feel like I was a burden. That's what love is. Seeing someone's worth when they can't see it themselves. The words hit Jake somewhere deep. He thought of Charlotte standing in his apartment, insisting he deserved better. He thought of Lily holding that check like it was a lifeline. He thought of his own stubborn pride, his refusal to accept help because accepting help meant admitting he'd failed to provide for his daughter alone. Thank you, Jake said quietly, for meeting me, for saying what you said. Thank you for trying to save him, for saving Charlotte, for being the kind of person who jumps. Elizabeth stood, then paused. Charlotte's having a memorial service for Thomas next week. Private, just family and close friends. She wants you there. Will you come? Jake nodded. Yes, I'll be there. After Elizabeth left, Jake sat in the chapel for another hour, letting the silence settle his racing thoughts. His phone buzzed with the confirmation that Charlotte's check had cleared. $50,000, minus the taxes that would come later. Enough to change everything. When he finally left, the winter sun was setting, painting the city in shades of orange and gold. Jake walked home slowly, his hands in his pockets, his breath fogging in the cold air. People passed him on the sidewalk, oblivious to the fact that the guy in the second-hand jacket had just become $50,000 richer. He was still invisible, still nobody, but maybe that was okay. Maybe being nobody meant he could become anybody. His phone rang. Charlotte's name appeared on the screen, and this time Jake answered. You cashed the check, she said without preamble. I did. Good. How do you feel? Jake considered the question. Scared, guilty, like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. That's reasonable. Want to know how I feel? How? Relieved. Because now I can stop worrying about whether you're going to starve to death or let your pride get you killed. She paused, and Jake heard the smile in her voice. Also grateful. Again. Still. Always. Charlotte, Elizabeth called me. Said you met. That you're coming to Thomas's memorial. Yeah, she's remarkable. She is, which brings me to why I'm calling. I need a favor. Charlotte's tone shifted, losing some of its lightness. Can we meet tomorrow? Somewhere private. There's something I need to tell you, something I haven't told anyone else. Jake's protective instincts flared immediately. Are you okay? Are you safe? Define safe. She laughed, but it sounded hollow. Tomorrow, Jake, please. I'll explain everything. But I need someone I can trust, and apparently you're the only person who fits that description right now. Where and when? My place. 7 p.m. I'll have security clear you at the desk. And Jake? Come alone. The line went dead before he could ask what this was about. Jake stood on the sidewalk, the winter wind cutting through his jacket, and wondered what he'd just agreed to. Charlotte Ashford needed his help with something. Charlotte Ashford, who had teams of lawyers and security guards and probably more resources than Jake could imagine. What could she possibly need from an ex-con warehouse worker? He'd find out tomorrow. When Jake got home, Lily was at the table doing homework, her math textbook open, her phone playing music softly. She looked up when he walked in, and something in his expression made her pause. What happened? Jake pulled out the bank statement on his phone and showed her the $50,000 deposit. Minus what he'd already moved to pay their overdue rent and utilities, they had $46,000 left. A fortune. A lifeline. Lily's eyes went wide. You did it. You actually took it. I did. And I met Thomas's wife today. The driver. Jake sat down across from his daughter. She told me it was okay to accept help, to let good things happen. She's right. Lily reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You're always taking care of everyone else, Dad. It's okay to let someone take care of you for once. Jake squeezed back, his throat tight. I got offered a promotion at work too. Management position. 32 an hour plus benefits. Dad, that's amazing. Yeah, it is. He looked around their cramped apartment, at the water-stained ceiling and the radiator that barely worked, at the life they'd been scraping by in for so long. Lily, what would you say about moving, getting a real apartment, maybe in a neighborhood with better schools? His daughter's face lit up with something Jake hadn't seen in years. Hope. Pure, uncomplicated hope. Really? You mean it? I mean it. We're going to be okay, baby. Finally, we're going to be okay. Lily came around the table and hugged him fiercely. Jake held his daughter and let himself believe just for a moment that maybe the universe could be fair, that maybe jumping into that frozen river had earned him something more than headlines and judgment, that maybe, just maybe, he deserved the second chance Charlotte Ashford was determined to give him. But tomorrow, he'd find out what that second chance would really cost. Charlotte's building occupied an entire block of Fifth Avenue, the kind of address that made Jake's new promotion seem quaint. The lobby gleamed with marble and gold fixtures, and a doorman in white gloves opened the brass-framed entrance before Jake even reached for the handle. Inside, a security guard checked his ID against a list, made a brief phone call, then directed him to a private elevator that required a key card to operate. Ms. Ashford is expecting you, penthouse level, the guard said, handing Jake a visitor's badge that felt heavier than it should. The elevator rose so smoothly Jake barely felt the movement, just watched the floor numbers climb past luxury and into something beyond it. When the doors opened, he stepped directly into Charlotte's apartment. Not a hallway, not a foyer. The elevator opened into her living space like something from a movie. The penthouse was exactly as she'd described it. Too much space for one person. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park, the city lights spreading out like a galaxy below. The furniture was elegant and minimal, the kind of design that looked effortless but probably cost more than most people's houses. Original artwork hung on the walls. Everything was perfect and cold and utterly impersonal, like a high-end hotel suite that nobody actually lived in. Charlotte stood by the windows, silhouetted against the city lights. She wore jeans and a cashmere sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Somehow, dressed down, she looked more intimidating than she had in her designer coat. More real. More vulnerable. You came, she said, turning. Her face was pale, and Jake noticed dark circles under her eyes that makeup had hidden during their previous meetings. You said you needed help. Jake stayed near the elevator, suddenly aware of how out of place he was in this gilded cage. What's going on, Charlotte? She poured 2 glasses of wine from a bottle on the counter, then seemed to think better of it and poured herself whiskey instead. She offered Jake the wine glass. He took it but didn't drink. The crash wasn't an accident, Charlotte said abruptly. Someone tried to kill me. The words hung in the air between them. Jake set his wine glass down carefully, his mind racing. What are you talking about? The police said your driver had a heart attack. The car went off the bridge because someone induced that heart attack. Charlotte's voice was steady, but her hand shook slightly as she took a drink. Thomas was healthy, 53 years old, perfect blood pressure, ran marathons. The autopsy showed massive cardiac arrest, but there were also trace amounts of potassium chloride in his system. Not enough to be immediately obvious, but enough to stop a healthy heart. Jake felt cold. You're saying someone poisoned him? I'm saying someone wanted it to look like an accident. A tragic loss of control, a momentary medical crisis. Thomas dies, I drown, and everyone mourns the terrible fate of the Ashford heiress. Charlotte's laugh was bitter. Except you dove into that river and ruined their plan. Have you told the police? I told them. They're investigating, but quietly. Very quietly, because the person who did this has money and power and connections. Charlotte crossed to the window, staring out at the city like it might hold answers. My uncle, Robert Ashford, my father's brother, he stands to inherit everything if I die. Jake moved closer, processing this. Murder, conspiracy. The kind of thing that happened in movies, not to real people standing in Manhattan penthouses. You're sure it's him? No, that's the problem. I'm not sure of anything. Charlotte turned to face him, and Jake saw real fear in her eyes for the first time since he'd pulled her from the river. But 3 months ago, someone broke into my office and went through my files. 2 months ago, my car's brake lines were cut. I thought it was paranoia. Thought I was seeing threats where there weren't any. Then Thomas died, and I went into that river, and suddenly paranoia doesn't seem so crazy anymore. You need better security, bodyguards who... I have bodyguards. I have a security team that costs more per year than most people earn in a lifetime. Charlotte's voice cracked slightly. But I don't know who to trust anymore, Jake. My uncle is on the board of my father's company. He has access to everything, everyone. If he wants me dead, he can buy the loyalty of anyone around me, security guards, assistants, even friends. Money is a powerful motivator. Jake understood what she was really saying, why she'd called him here. But you think you can trust me? I know I can trust you. You turned down $50,000. You're not for sale. Charlotte set her whiskey down and looked at him directly. I need someone who doesn't care about my money. Someone who'll tell me the truth, even if it's ugly. Someone who's already proven they'll risk everything to keep me alive. She took a breath. I need you, Jake. For 1 week. Maybe 2. Just until I can figure out what's really happening and who I can trust. I'm not a bodyguard. I don't know anything about protection details or security protocols. You know how to fight. I saw your record. Bar fights, altercations in prison. You know how to handle yourself. Charlotte moved closer, her desperation showing through the cracks in her composed facade. And more importantly, you're invisible. No one would expect me to hire an ex-con warehouse worker as protection. You'd blend in, see things my official security team would miss. Jake wanted to say no. Every instinct told him to walk away from this mess, to take his $50,000 and his promotion and build a quiet life with Lily. Charlotte Ashford's problems were not his problems. Her dangerous family drama was not his responsibility. But he looked at her standing there, alone in her perfect penthouse with its 17 empty rooms, and he remembered her face underwater, remembered breathing life back into her cold body, remembered thinking that if he'd been just 30 seconds slower, just a little less stubborn about diving into that river, she'd be dead. What exactly are you asking me to do? Relief flooded Charlotte's expression. Move in here, you and Lily. I have guest rooms, plenty of space. You'd pose as my new personal assistant or security consultant, or whatever story makes sense. Be my shadow, watch for anything suspicious, help me figure out if my uncle is really trying to kill me or if I'm losing my mind. And if we find proof he's behind this, then we go to the police with something solid, something that can't be ignored or bought off. Charlotte's jaw set with determination. I want justice for Thomas, and I want to live without looking over my shoulder. Jake thought of Lily, of the normal life he'd promised her, thought of the apartment they could rent with Charlotte's money, the fresh start they deserved. Then he thought of Elizabeth Reyes in that chapel, talking about Thomas's dedication to protecting the Ashford family. Thought of Charlotte's panic underwater, her desperate fight for survival. 1 week, Jake said finally. I'll give you 1 week. But Lily comes first. If there's any danger to her, any threat at all, we're gone. Understood? Understood, Charlotte extended her hand. Thank you, Jake. You have no idea what this means to me. Jake shook her hand, sealing the agreement, and wondered if he was being heroic or just incredibly stupid. Probably both. Convincing Lily to move into a billionaire's penthouse for a week turned out to be easier than Jake expected. His daughter took one look at the photos Charlotte sent and said, "When do we pack?" The promise of her own room with an actual closet and a bathroom that wasn't shared with neighbors was apparently all the convincing she needed. They moved in 2 days later with nothing but suitcases and Lily's basketball. Charlotte had offered to have someone pack their things professionally, but Jake insisted on doing it themselves. Control. He needed to maintain some sense of control in this increasingly surreal situation. The guest suite Charlotte gave them was larger than their entire apartment. 2 bedrooms connected by a sitting area with a view of Central Park that made Lily literally gasp. The closets were walk-in. The bathroom had heated floors and a shower with 6 different heads. Jake found himself resenting it slightly, this casual display of wealth, even as he appreciated the comfort. "This is insane," Lily whispered, bouncing on her bed like a little kid. "Dad, there's a TV that comes out of the footboard, and the sheets feel like clouds." "Don't get too comfortable," Jake warned. "We're only here for a week, maybe 2. But watching his daughter's joy, seeing her smile without that shadow of shame she usually carried, Jake felt something shift in his chest. Maybe this was what normal could feel like. Maybe this glimpse of how the other half lived would motivate Lily to work hard, to reach for something better than the life he'd given her so far. Charlotte appeared in their doorway, knocking softly on the frame. "Everything okay? Do you need anything?" "This is perfect," Lily said quickly. "Thank you so much, Ms. Ashford." "Charlotte, please. Ms. Ashford makes me feel ancient." She smiled at Lily, then turned to Jake. "Can we talk? In my office?" Jake followed her down the hallway, past more artwork and designer furniture, to a study lined with bookshelves. A massive desk dominated the space, covered with papers and a laptop. Charlotte closed the door behind them. "I have a charity gala tomorrow night," she said without preamble. "The Winter Ball for Children's Cancer Research. I'm the honorary chair this year, so I have to attend. Black tie, 500 guests, lots of press." She handed Jake a folder. "Here's the guest list, the venue layout, and background on everyone who'll be there." Jake flipped through the papers, seeing names he vaguely recognized from news articles and gossip columns, mayors and actors and business titans. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because my Uncle Robert will be there. He never misses these events, loves playing the philanthropist." Charlotte's expression hardened. "I want you watching him. See who he talks to, what he does when he thinks no one's paying attention. Maybe we'll get lucky and he'll slip up." "You want me at a black tie gala?" "Charlotte, I don't exactly blend in with high society. You'll be my +1, my date." At Jake's surprised look, she continued. "I always bring someone, usually a business associate or family friend. Bringing you will raise eyebrows, sure, but it also gives you legitimate access. No one will question why you're by my side all night." Jake thought about wearing a tuxedo, about making small talk with billionaires and celebrities, about being thrust into Charlotte's world like he belonged there. The idea made his skin crawl. "I don't have anything to wear." "Already handled. I had my stylist get your measurements from the clothes you left at the hospital. A tuxedo will be delivered this afternoon, tailored to fit." Charlotte must have seen the protest forming on Jake's face because she held up a hand. "This is business, Jake. You're working for me now. Consider it a uniform. I'm not some doll you can dress up and parade around." "No, you're the man I'm trusting with my life." Charlotte's voice softened. "I know this is uncomfortable. I know you'd rather stay invisible. But if Robert is trying to kill me, he'll make a move eventually. And when he does, I need someone watching who he won't see coming. That's you." Jake wanted to argue, but she was right. He'd agreed to protect her, and that meant going wherever she went, even to some ridiculous charity ball where he'd be the most out-of-place person in the room. "Fine," he muttered, "but I'm not dancing." Charlotte's smile was genuine for the first time that evening. "We'll see about that." The tuxedo arrived at 3 p.m., delivered by a nervous young man who made Jake sign 3 different forms before handing over the garment bag. Inside was a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, a crisp white shirt, and shoes that looked like they'd never seen pavement. Everything fit like it was made for him, because it probably was. Lily insisted on seeing him dressed up. Jake emerged from his room feeling ridiculous, tugging at the bow tie that felt like a noose. His daughter's eyes went wide. "Dad, you look—" She circled him, taking in the transformation. "You look like James Bond." "I look like a fraud." "You look handsome." Charlotte appeared from her room, and Jake's breath caught. She wore a floor-length gown in deep emerald that matched her eyes, Her hair swept up in an elegant twist, diamonds glittering at her throat and ears. She looked like royalty, like someone so far above Jake's station that standing next to her felt blasphemous. "You clean up nice," Charlotte said, her eyes traveling over him with obvious approval. "Very nice." Jake felt heat creep up his neck. "You look incredible." "I know." She said it without ego, just stating a fact. "Lily, there's leftover lasagna in the fridge and the building has 24-hour security. Marcus will be in the lobby all night. Call me if you need anything." "I'll be fine," Lily assured them, but Jake saw worry flicker across her face. His daughter was 14, old enough to stay alone, but that didn't mean he liked leaving her. "I'll have my phone on vibrate," Jake promised. "Any problem? Anything at all? You text me and I'll come right back." "We'll be back by midnight," Charlotte added. "Earlier if we can manage it." The drive to the gala was tense. They sat in the back of a new limousine, this one driven by a different chauffeur, a woman named Patricia who'd been with Charlotte's family for a decade. Jake found himself watching her carefully, looking for any sign of threat. Was he being paranoid? Probably. But paranoia was the price of this arrangement. "Tell me about your uncle," Jake said quietly. "What kind of man is he?" Charlotte gazed out the window at the passing city. "Charming? Intelligent? Ruthless in business but generous in public. He donates millions to charity, sits on boards of half a dozen nonprofits, shows up in the society pages with beautiful women on his arm." She paused. "My father never trusted him. Said Robert was too ambitious, too hungry for the spotlight. When Dad died 3 years ago, Robert expected to take over the company. Instead, Dad's will left everything to me. The business, the fortune, the legacy. That's motive. That's also circumstantial. Robert is already wealthy. He doesn't need my money." Charlotte's hands twisted together in her lap. "But he wants control. He wants the Ashford name to mean something, to be remembered for building an empire. Under my leadership, the company is moving in directions he disagrees with. More ethical sourcing, better worker conditions, reduced profit margins in favor of sustainability. Robert thinks I'm destroying Dad's legacy with my bleeding heart liberal nonsense." His words. "So this is about more than money. It's about power and legacy." "Exactly." Charlotte looked at him. "If I die, Robert inherits. He'll undo everything I've built, turn the company back into the profit machine it was before, and he'll sleep just fine knowing he killed his niece to do it." The certainty in her voice sent chills down Jake's spine. This wasn't speculation anymore. Charlotte genuinely believed her uncle wanted her dead, and based on everything she'd told him, Jake was starting to believe it too. The gala was held at the Plaza Hotel, its grand ballroom transformed into a winter wonderland. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing light across white tablecloths and ice sculptures. Hundreds of people in expensive clothes milled about, drinking champagne and laughing that particular laugh of the wealthy, loud and confident, and utterly secure in their place at the top of the world. Jake felt every eye turned to them as they entered. Whispers followed Charlotte's progress across the room, and Jake knew exactly what they were saying. "Who's the nobody with Charlotte Ashford? Where did she find him? Is that the ex-con from the news?" Charlotte seemed oblivious to it all, her hand resting lightly on Jake's arm as she guided him through the crowd. She stopped to greet people, air-kissing cheeks and making introductions that Jake immediately forgot. Everyone was polite to his face and curious behind their practiced smiles. He was a novelty, a story they'd tell at dinner parties. The criminal who saved the heiress and now escorted her to galas. "Charlotte, darling," the voice came from behind them, smooth and cultured. Jake turned to see a man in his 60s approaching, silver-haired and distinguished, wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than Jake's car used to. His smile was warm, his eyes calculating. Charlotte's grip on Jake's arm tightened almost imperceptibly. "Uncle Robert, I wasn't sure you'd make it." "And miss the social event of the season?" "Never." Robert Ashford pulled his niece into a hug that looked affectionate but felt predatory. When he released her, his gaze shifted to Jake. "And who's this?" "Not your usual type, Charlotte." "This is Jake Morrison, my guest." Charlotte's voice held a warning edge. "Jake, my uncle, Robert Ashford." Robert extended his hand, his smile never wavering. Jake shook it, meeting the older man's eyes directly. The grip was firm, competitive, a test. Ah, yes, the hero from the bridge. Robert's tone suggested he found the whole thing amusing. Quite the dramatic rescue. The media couldn't get enough of it. How does it feel to be famous, Mr. Morrison? I'm not famous. I just did what needed doing. Modest. How refreshing. Robert's eyes were cold despite his warm tone. You know, Charlotte, you should be more careful. Driving on that bridge in winter conditions at night, it's dangerous. You could have been killed. But I wasn't, Charlotte said pointedly. Thanks to Jake. Indeed. Lucky he was there. Robert's gaze lingered on Jake a moment too long. Well, I won't monopolize your time. Enjoy the evening, both of you. Charlotte, we should discuss the quarterly reports next week, some concerns from the board. I'm sure we can address them. I'm sure we can. Robert smiled once more, nodded at Jake, and disappeared into the crowd. Jake waited until he was out of earshot. That's him? Your uncle? That's him. Charlotte's face was pale. Did you catch it? Catch what? The way he said I should be more careful, like he was warning me, like next time I might not be so lucky. Charlotte's hand was still gripping Jake's arm. He knows, Jake. He knows I survived, and he's already planning his next move. Jake scanned the ballroom, looking for Robert in the sea of tuxedos and gowns. He spotted him near the bar, talking animatedly with a younger man in a security uniform. They spoke for less than a minute before the younger man nodded and walked away. Charlotte, the man your uncle was just talking to. Do you recognize him? She followed Jake's gaze. That's Victor Chen, head of security for the hotel. Why? Because your uncle just gave him instructions about something, and Victor looked nervous when he walked away. Jake's instincts were screaming. Something was wrong. Stay close to me. Don't eat or drink anything unless you see it poured or prepared directly. You think he'd try something here? In front of 500 witnesses? I think a man who'd poison his niece's driver wouldn't hesitate to slip something in her champagne at a crowded event. Jake kept his voice low, his body angled to shield Charlotte from the room. We should leave. I can't. I'm the honorary chair. I have to give a speech in 20 minutes. Charlotte's jaw set stubbornly. Besides, running proves I'm scared. I won't give him that satisfaction. Your pride isn't worth your life. Maybe not. But my father built this charity. It's saved hundreds of children's lives. I'm not abandoning it because my uncle is a monster. Charlotte straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin. Stay with me. Watch my back. But I'm giving that speech. Jake wanted to argue, wanted to throw her over his shoulder and carry her out of this gilded trap, but he saw the determination in her eyes and recognized it, the same stubborn courage that had kept him fighting in that frozen river. Charlotte Ashford was a lot of things, but she wasn't a coward. Fine, Jake said, but I taste everything first, and if I see anything suspicious, we're leaving. I don't care if you're mid-sentence in your speech. Deal. The next 20 minutes were the longest of Jake's life. He shadowed Charlotte through the ballroom, his eyes constantly scanning for threats. Every waiter who approached them got a hard stare. Every guest who came too close got assessed for weapons or hostile intent. Jake felt hyper-aware of everything, his prison instincts kicking in, the heightened alertness that had kept him alive inside. When a waiter offered Charlotte champagne, Jake took the glass and sipped it first. It tasted normal, but who knew what normal champagne spiked with poison tasted like? When someone brought her a plate of hors d'oeuvres, Jake ate one of each item before letting her touch anything. Charlotte watched this with a mixture of gratitude and concern. You're going to make yourself sick, she whispered. Better me than you. Finally, the speeches began. A hospital administrator talked about the charity's mission. A young cancer survivor shared her story, bringing half the room to tears. Then Charlotte was introduced, and the ballroom erupted in applause. She walked to the podium with grace, her fear invisible beneath her poised exterior. Jake positioned himself at the edge of the stage, his eyes sweeping the crowd. Robert stood near the back, applauding politely, his expression unreadable. Thank you all for coming, Charlotte began, her voice clear and confident. 3 years ago, my father started this foundation with a simple mission: ensure that no child dies because their family can't afford treatment, He believed that every life has value, that every child deserves a fighting chance. Jake listened with half his attention, the other half focused on the crowd. On Robert. On the security guard Victor Chen, who was now stationed near an exit, talking into his radio. Tonight, I'm honored to announce that we've exceeded our fundraising goal, Charlotte continued. Thanks to your generosity, we've raised $3.2 million. More applause. Charlotte smiled, but Jake saw the strain around her eyes. She was scared, putting on a brave face for hundreds of people who had no idea she believed her uncle was planning to murder her. My father taught me that with great privilege comes great responsibility, Charlotte said, that those of us who have been given much must give back, that wealth without compassion is just greed in expensive clothes. A few uncomfortable laughs from the crowd. Charlotte's gaze found her uncle. He also taught me to trust my instincts, to know the difference between allies and enemies, even when they smile at you, even when they share your blood. The room had gone very quiet. I think about that a lot lately, about trust, about how easily it can be broken, about what people will do for money and power. Jake's pulse quickened. What was she doing? This wasn't the speech she'd rehearsed. She was going off script, and from the way Robert's smile had frozen, he knew it too. But I also think about the good people in this world, Charlotte continued, her eyes finding Jake. The ones who risk everything for strangers, who jump into freezing rivers because someone needs help, who show us that courage isn't about being fearless, it's about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. The crowd followed her gaze to Jake, and he felt his face heat under the attention. Charlotte's expression softened. Thank you all for being here tonight, for your generosity and your compassion. Let's continue my father's legacy together. Let's save lives. She raised her glass in a toast. To second chances, to survival, to the people brave enough to fight for both. The ballroom erupted in applause again. Charlotte left the podium and walked straight to Jake, her composure finally cracking. Get me out of here, she whispered. Please. Jake didn't hesitate. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders and guided her toward the nearest exit, aware of eyes following them, of whispers rising like steam. Robert stood by the bar, no longer smiling, watching them leave with an expression that confirmed everything Charlotte had feared. They made it to the limousine before Charlotte broke down. She collapsed against the leather seat, her perfect facade shattering, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she gasped. That was stupid. I shouldn't have said those things. I just looked at him and I couldn't pretend anymore. Couldn't smile and act like everything was fine when he killed Thomas and tried to kill me. Jake slid into the seat beside her, uncertain what to do. He'd never been good at comfort, at knowing the right words, so he did what felt natural, pulling Charlotte against his chest and letting her cry. You were brave in there, he said quietly. Brave and maybe a little crazy, but I get it. Sometimes you have to stop running and face the monster. Charlotte's laugh was watery. Did I just sign my death warrant? No. You put him on notice that you know what he's doing. That might make him desperate, might make him careless. Jake stroked her hair without thinking about it, the gesture automatic. We'll figure this out, Charlotte. We'll find proof and we'll stop him. She pulled back enough to look up at him, her makeup smeared, her eyes red but fierce. Promise me something. What? If something happens to me, if Robert succeeds, promise you'll make sure everyone knows the truth. Promise you'll fight for justice, not for my money or my legacy, just because it's right. Jake thought about the last time someone had asked him to promise something. It had been Sarah, 2 weeks before he went to prison, begging him to be a good father to Lily. He'd failed that promise for 6 years, locked in a cage while his daughter grew up without him. But he'd spent every day since trying to make it right. I promise, he said, and meant it with everything he had. They sat in silence as the limousine navigated through Manhattan traffic, Charlotte's head still resting against Jake's chest, his arm around her shoulders. It should have felt awkward, this intimacy between a billionaire and an ex-con, but somehow it didn't. Somehow, in this moment, they were just two people who'd survived something terrible and were trying to survive what came next. Thank you, Charlotte whispered, for being here, for believing me. Most people would think I'm paranoid. Most people haven't pulled a dying woman from a frozen river. Jake's voice was rough. I know what desperation looks like, Charlotte. I saw it in your eyes that night, and I see determination now. You're not paranoid. You're fighting for your life. The limousine pulled up to Charlotte's building. They rode the elevator in silence, both lost in thought. When they entered the penthouse, they found Lily asleep on the couch, her phone still playing some show she'd been watching. Jake picked up his daughter carefully, carrying her to her room without waking her. She was getting too big for this, but she'd always be his little girl. When he returned to the living room, Charlotte had changed out of her gown into sweatpants and a t-shirt, her hair down, all the glamour stripped away. She looked younger like this. Vulnerable. "Want a drink?" she asked. "Yeah, I think I need one." They sat on the couch where Lily had been, drinking whiskey and watching the city lights through the massive windows. Jake thought about Robert Ashford's cold eyes, about the security guard who'd looked nervous, about Charlotte's voice cracking when she talked about trust and betrayal. "What happens now?" Jake asked. "Now we wait for him to make a move, and when he does, we'll be ready." Charlotte's hand found his in the darkness. Together, Jake squeezed her hand, sealing the pact between them. He jumped into a frozen river to save this woman, and somehow, without meaning to, he jumped into something far more dangerous. A conspiracy, a murder plot, a fight against a monster who wore a distinguished smile and donated millions to charity. But he'd made a promise, and Jake Morrison was done breaking promises. The attack came 3 days later, exactly when Jake's guard had started to slip. Those 3 days had settled into an uneasy routine. Jake shadowed Charlotte everywhere, learning the rhythms of her life. Morning coffee at 6, conference calls with Tokyo at 7, breakfast meetings with board members who smiled too much and said too little. He watched everyone who came near her with the paranoia of a man who'd survived prison, cataloging faces and behaviors, looking for the crack that would reveal Robert's next move. Lily adapted to penthouse life with surprising ease. She did her homework at Charlotte's dining table, the marble surface bigger than their old apartment's entire kitchen. Charlotte bought her new clothes without asking, expensive things that made Lily's eyes light up even as she protested they were too much. They were becoming friends, Jake realized. His daughter and the billionaire heiress, bonding over late-night ice cream and shared stories about absent parents and the weight of expectations. Charlotte, for her part, seemed calmer with them there. The haunted look that had shadowed her eyes at the gala faded slightly. She laughed at Lily's jokes, asked Jake's opinion on things that had nothing to do with security, and sometimes late at night, when Lily was asleep and the city glowed below them, she and Jake would sit on the couch and just talk. About his time in prison, about her lonely childhood in boarding schools, about the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. "Do you ever think about that night differently?" Charlotte asked on the third evening, her bare feet tucked under her, a glass of wine balanced on her knee. "Like, what if you hadn't been walking by the river? What if you'd taken a different route home?" Jake considered this. He'd thought about it constantly, actually, the million tiny decisions that had led to that moment. "I'd probably be at my warehouse job right now, loading trucks and trying not to think about how I was failing my daughter." "You weren't failing her." "I was." "I am." Jake stared into his whiskey. "Every parent thinks they're doing their best, but best isn't always good enough. Lily deserves more than I can give her. She deserves a father who loves her enough to jump into frozen rivers for strangers," Charlotte said softly. "That's pretty remarkable, Jake. Don't sell yourself short." Before Jake could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from Frank at the warehouse asking if he'd made a decision about the supervisor position. Jake had been putting it off, this choice between his old life and whatever this new one was becoming. The promotion felt like a lifeline and a trap simultaneously. "You should take it," Charlotte said, reading over his shoulder without apology. "The job. You'd be good at it." "How do you know?" "Because you're good at this. Watching over me. Making sure I'm safe. You have instincts most people don't have." She smiled slightly. "Prison probably wasn't a complete waste of time if it taught you how to read threats." Jake wanted to argue that prison had been nothing but a waste, 6 years stolen from his life, 6 years away from his daughter, while Sarah spiraled into addiction. But Charlotte had a point. Inside, he'd learned to watch backs, to sense violence before it erupted, to trust his gut when something felt wrong. Those skills were keeping her alive now. "I'll think about it," he said finally. They fell into comfortable silence, the kind that happens between people who've been through something together. Jake found himself studying Charlotte's profile in the dim light, the elegant line of her jaw, the way her hair fell across her shoulders. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. She was smart and fierce and vulnerable in ways she tried to hide. She made him want to be better than he was. Dangerous territory, his mind whispered. Don't confuse gratitude with something else. Don't forget who you are and who she is. But sitting there in the quiet, it was easy to forget about the gulf between their worlds. Easy to imagine that maybe, just maybe, jumping into that river had led him somewhere he was meant to be. Charlotte's phone shattered the moment, buzzing insistently on the coffee table. She picked it up, frowned at the screen, and answered. "Robert, what a surprise." Her voice went cold immediately. "No, I'm not discussing the Singapore deal at 10 o'clock at night. We'll talk at the board meeting next week." She listened, her expression darkening. "That's not your decision to make. I'm CEO, not you." More listening. "Fine. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., my office. But this better be important." She ended the call and threw the phone down like it had burned her. "He's pushing for a hostile vote to remove me as CEO. Says I'm too young, too inexperienced, making reckless decisions that threaten shareholder value." Can he do that? Technically, yes, if he gets enough board votes. Charlotte stood, pacing to the windows. "But it's not about the company, Jake. It's about control. If he can't kill me quietly, he'll destroy me professionally. Either way, he gets what he wants." Jake joined her at the windows. Below, the city stretched out endlessly, millions of lights marking millions of lives. From up here, everything looked peaceful, safe. But Jake knew better than most that appearances meant nothing. Danger wore friendly faces and expensive suits. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady with decision. "I want to fight. I want to call his bluff. If Robert's planning something, let him try it. We'll be ready." "Charlotte, I'm tired of being scared, Jake. Tired of looking over my shoulder and second-guessing everyone around me. If there's going to be a confrontation, I want it on my terms." She turned to face him, her green eyes blazing with determination. "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., my office. He'll be there. And so will we. Maybe we can force his hand, make him reveal something we can use against him." Jake didn't like it. Every instinct screamed that this was exactly what Robert wanted, to get Charlotte alone and vulnerable. But he also understood her need to stop running, to face the threat head on. He'd felt the same way plenty of times. "Okay," he said finally. "But we do this smart. I scope out your office first, check for any security issues. You don't drink or eat anything he brings, and I stay in the room the entire time." "Deal." Charlotte reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you. For understanding, for not trying to lock me away somewhere safe." "Safe is an illusion anyway," Jake said. "Better to fight and take your chances." He didn't know how prophetic those words would become. The next morning arrived too fast. Jake woke at 5, his body still trained to warehouse hours, and did 100 push-ups on the guest room floor. Old habits from prison, keeping his body sharp because weakness meant vulnerability. He showered, dressed in the dark pants and button-down shirt Charlotte had bought him, what she called his professional bodyguard look, and checked his phone. A missed call from Frank at 4:47 a.m. A voicemail. "Morrison, it's Frank. Look, I need an answer on that supervisor position. Got another candidate lined up if you're not interested. Call me back by noon or I'm moving on. No hard feelings either way." Decision time. Jake stared at his phone, at the choice that would determine his future. Take the promotion, move back to his old life with Lily, use Charlotte's money to build something stable and normal. Or stay in this penthouse, in this dangerous game of cat and mouse with a murderer, and keep protecting a woman who'd somehow become more important to him than was smart or safe. He didn't call Frank back. Not yet. Charlotte was already up when Jake emerged, dressed in a sharp gray suit that made her look every inch the CEO. Her hair was pulled back severely, her makeup minimal but perfect, her expression all business. She was armoring herself for battle, Jake realized, putting on the mask of power and competence to face her uncle. "Coffee's ready," she said, pouring him a cup without asking. She knew by now how he took it. Black, no sugar, simple. Lily's still asleep. I left a note saying we'd be back by lunch. Your office. Tell me the layout again. 40th floor corner suite. 2 entrances, one through my assistant's area, one directly from the private elevator. Windows on 2 sides, both bulletproof. Panic button under my desk that alerts building security. Charlotte recited it mechanically, like she'd rehearsed. Robert will come through the main entrance. You'll be there too, standing behind me, visible. A reminder that I'm not alone anymore. Jake nodded, his mind mapping escape routes and threat vectors. He'd visited her office once already, but repetition created muscle memory. If something went wrong, he needed to react without thinking. They rode down in silence, the early morning streets still quiet as Patricia drove them to Charlotte's office building. The Ashford Corporation occupied 15 floors of a glass tower in Midtown, all modern design and corporate efficiency. Charlotte's private elevator required a key card and fingerprint scan, the kind of security that should have made Jake feel better, but didn't. Security was only as good as the people running it, and if Robert had corrupted anyone inside the company, all these measures were theater. Charlotte's assistant, an efficient woman in her 40s named Sarah, was already at her desk when they arrived. She stood immediately when Charlotte entered. Morning, Ms. Ashford. Mr. Ashford called to confirm the 9 o'clock meeting. He's bringing Martin Prescott. Charlotte's expression flickered. The corporate attorney? Why? He didn't say. Should I try to find out? No, let him play whatever game he's planning. Charlotte continued into her office, Jake following close. She closed the door and leaned against it, eyes shut. Martin Prescott only shows up when there's legal action involved. Contracts, hostile takeovers, shareholder disputes. Robert's making his official move. Can he remove you as CEO? With enough board votes, yes. But it would be messy, public, damaging to the company. Charlotte moved to her desk, her sanctuary of power. Which means he either has the votes locked down or he's bluffing. Either way, this meeting is a power play. Jake checked the room again, looking for anything out of place. The office was pristine, all leather furniture and abstract art, with those bulletproof windows overlooking the city. A wet bar in the corner, a door leading to a private bathroom, built-in bookshelves lined with legal texts and business books. No obvious threats. Where do you want me? Jake asked. Here. Charlotte gestured to a spot behind and to the left of her desk chair. Visible but not aggressive. I want Robert to see you, to know I have someone watching, but I don't want it to look like I'm afraid of him. You should be afraid of him. I am, but he doesn't need to know that. Charlotte sat in her chair, arranging papers on her desk with precise movements, armor, control. The mask firmly in place. When he gets here, let me do the talking. Only intervene if something feels wrong. Jake took his position, his back to the windows, his eyes on the door. At 8:57, Sarah buzzed the intercom. Mr. Ashford and Mr. Prescott are here. Charlotte took a breath, her hands flat on the desk. Send them in. The door opened. Robert Ashford entered first, looking distinguished in a navy suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, his smile warm and avuncular. Behind him came Martin Prescott, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the predatory look of a corporate shark. Both men stopped when they saw Jake. Charlotte, Robert said, his smile not wavering. I didn't realize we were having a group meeting. Who's your friend? Jake Morrison, my security consultant. Charlotte's voice was ice. He stays. Now what's so urgent it couldn't wait until the board meeting? Robert exchanged a glance with Prescott, some silent communication passing between them. He moved to one of the chairs facing Charlotte's desk, settling in like he owned the place. Prescott remained standing, a leather folder tucked under his arm. I'm concerned about you, Charlotte, Robert began, his tone dripping with false concern. The incident on the bridge, the increasingly erratic behavior, the spectacle at the gala. You're not yourself. I'm fine. Are you? Because bringing an ex-convict to a charity function, making veiled accusations in your speech, and now hiring this same man as personal security? Robert shook his head sadly. It suggests someone who's not thinking clearly, someone who might not be fit to run a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Charlotte's jaw tightened, but her voice remained level. Get to the point, Robert. Prescott stepped forward, opening his folder. We're here to present a formal proposal from several members of the board. Given recent concerns about your judgment and decision-making, they're requesting you voluntarily step down as CEO and accept a position as Chairman Emeritus. You'd retain your shares, of course, but operational control would transfer to a new CEO.
You, Charlotte said flatly, looking at Robert. Someone with experience. Someone stable. Robert leaned forward, his expression earnest. This isn't personal, Charlotte. It's about protecting the company your father built, protecting his legacy. Jake watched the performance, impressed despite himself. Robert was good. He sounded genuinely concerned, like a caring uncle trying to help his troubled niece. Anyone listening would think Charlotte was unstable, that Robert was being reasonable. But Jake saw the calculation in the older man's eyes, the barely concealed triumph. "And if I refuse?" Charlotte asked. "Then we call a vote at next week's board meeting. And I have to tell you, Charlotte, I have the numbers." Robert's mask slipped slightly, showing the steel underneath. 7 of the 12 board members have already committed to supporting the change. It's over. You can leave gracefully or be forcibly removed. Your choice. Charlotte was silent for a long moment.
Jake could see her mind working, calculating options, looking for the trap. When she spoke, her voice was deadly calm. "You poisoned Thomas. You tried to kill me." Prescott's eyes widened. Robert's expression didn't change at all, which was somehow more chilling than any reaction would have been. "That's a serious accusation," Robert said softly. "One you can't prove. One that makes you sound exactly as unstable as I've been telling the board you are." The autopsy showed potassium chloride in his system. Inconclusive amounts. Could have been contamination. Could have been anything. Robert stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "Charlotte, I understand you're upset. Losing control is difficult, but making wild accusations won't help your case. It only proves you're not fit to lead." "Get out," Charlotte said, her voice shaking slightly. "Get out of my office. We'll see you at the board meeting. Think about my offer. Voluntary resignation is better for everyone." Robert moved toward the door, Prescott following. At the threshold, Robert paused and looked back. "Oh, and Charlotte? You should be more careful about who you trust. Someone with Jake's background, his history of violence? That's another example of poor judgment, something the board won't overlook." They left. The door clicked shut with an air of finality. Charlotte sat frozen in her chair, her carefully constructed composure crumbling. Jake moved to her side immediately. "He admitted it," Charlotte whispered. "Not in words, but the way he said it. He knows about Thomas. He knows everything." "But he's right. You can't prove it." Jake's mind was racing, trying to figure out their next move. "If he has 7 board members, he can remove you. And once you're out, once you don't control the company, you're vulnerable. Easier to kill." Charlotte looked up at him, and Jake saw real fear in her eyes for the first time since the night she'd asked for his help.
"What do I do?" Before Jake could answer, the lights went out. Not just in Charlotte's office. Through the windows, Jake could see the entire building had gone dark, emergency lights flickering on in the hallways. Charlotte's computer died. Her desk phone went silent. Complete power failure. "Backup generators should kick in," Charlotte said, but her voice wavered. "They should." The door to her office burst open. Not Sarah at her desk. Not building security. A man Jake had never seen before, young and muscular in a security guard uniform, his hand reaching inside his jacket. Jake moved without thinking. 6 years of prison instincts, of reading violence before it happened, of knowing when someone meant harm. He launched himself at the guard, catching the man's wrist just as a syringe came free. They crashed into the doorframe together, Jake's momentum driving them into the outer office. The guard was strong, trained. He tried to twist free, to plunge the syringe into Jake's neck, but Jake had fought bigger men in smaller spaces. He slammed the guard's hand against the wall once, twice, until the syringe clattered free. Then he drove his knee into the man's stomach, doubling him over, and followed with an elbow to the back of the head. The guard dropped. Jake stood over him, breathing hard, his knuckles bloody from where they'd connected with the wall. Behind him, he heard Charlotte's sharp intake of breath. "Jake?" He turned. 2 more guards were coming down the hallway, moving fast. These weren't building security. They were Robert's people, coming to finish what the first one had started.
coming to kill Charlotte while the building was dark and everyone was confused. Jake grabbed the fallen syringe in Charlotte's hand in one motion. Run! They bolted for the private elevator, but Jake knew before they reached it that it wouldn't work. No power. They were trapped on the 40th floor with killers closing in and no way down. Stairs! Charlotte gasped, pulling him toward an emergency exit. They crashed through the door into a concrete stairwell, their footsteps echoing as they started down. Behind them, Jake heard the door slam open again. Pursuit. Keep going, Jake urged, half pulling Charlotte down the stairs. She kicked off her heels, running barefoot on concrete, her breath coming in ragged gasps. 20 floors down, 30, the stairs blurring together. Jake's legs burned, but he didn't slow. Couldn't slow. The men behind them were gaining, younger and fresher, unencumbered by the need to protect anyone. At the 25th floor, Jake made a decision. He pushed Charlotte ahead and stopped, turning to face their pursuers. Two men, both armed with syringes, both looking like former military. Jake was outnumbered and unarmed except for the single syringe in his pocket. Keep going, he shouted at Charlotte. Get to the lobby, call the police. Jake, no! Go! The first guard reached him. Jake feinted left, then dove right, using the confined space of the stairwell to his advantage. He caught the guard's arm, redirecting his momentum into the railing. Metal crunched. The guard's syringe went flying. Jake didn't give him time to recover, driving his fist into the man's throat, then shoving him into his partner. They both went down, tangled together on the landing. Jake didn't wait to see if they'd get up. He ran after Charlotte, taking the stairs 3 at a time, his heart hammering against his ribs. He could hear them behind him, recovering, coming again. Charlotte was 10 floors ahead, her bare feet bleeding on the concrete, but she didn't slow. Tough, Jake thought, with something like admiration. She was tougher than she looked. They burst through the ground floor exit together, stumbling into the building's lobby. People everywhere, confused by the power outage, emergency lights casting everything in an eerie glow. Jake grabbed Charlotte, pulling her toward the main entrance, toward escape. That's when he saw Robert. The older man stood by the security desk, talking calmly to a uniformed officer. When he spotted Charlotte and Jake, his expression shifted to surprise that looked almost genuine. Almost. Charlotte, thank God. When the power went out, I was worried. Robert approached quickly, the officer trailing behind him. Are you all right? You look terrified. Stay away from me, Charlotte backed up, pressing against Jake. You did this. The power outage, the men in my office. What men? Robert looked at the officer, his concern perfectly performed. Officer, I don't know what she's talking about. There was a power failure, but there were men trying to kill her, Jake interrupted. 3 guards with syringes. We were chased down from the 40th floor. The officer looked between them, uncertainty crossing his face. Let me call this in. No need. One of the guards from the stairwell appeared, limping slightly but composed. He looked at the officer with professional courtesy. Sir, I'm Victor Chen, head of building security. There was an incident with these two. They attacked one of my men unprovoked. I was pursuing them to... That's a lie, Charlotte said desperately. Jake was protecting me. They were trying to inject me with something. She's been under a lot of stress, Robert said smoothly, his hand on the officer's shoulder. The incident on the bridge, some paranoid delusions. We were actually meeting this morning to discuss getting her help. Then the power failed and she panicked. Jake watched Robert work, watched the officer's expression shift from uncertainty to understanding, watched Charlotte's credibility crumble under the weight of her uncle's lies and influence. This was the trap. Not just the attack, but the narrative that followed. Making Charlotte look unstable, making Jake look like an enabling criminal, making Robert look like the concerned family member trying to help. I want to file a complaint, Jake said firmly. Someone tried to kill Charlotte Ashford. We have a syringe as evidence. He reached into his pocket. The syringe was gone. Of course it was. Somewhere in the fight, he'd lost it. They had nothing. No proof, no evidence. Just the word of an ex-con and a supposedly unstable heiress against a respected businessman. The officer looked uncomfortable. Maybe everyone should come down to the station, give statements. Of course, Robert agreed quickly. Whatever helps resolve this situation. Charlotte, would you be willing to see a doctor, just to make sure you're all right? Officer,
I'm happy to arrange. I'm not seeing any doctor you arrange, Charlotte said coldly. She looked at Jake, her eyes communicating what her words couldn't.
We're not safe here. We need to leave. We're going home. If you want a statement, call our lawyer. She walked toward the exit, Jake at her side, feeling every eye in the lobby watching them. Robert's gaze burned into his back, triumphant and malicious. They'd escaped the immediate threat, but they'd lost something crucial. The element of surprise. The benefit of doubt. Any chance of handling this quietly. Robert had made his move, and he'd done it brilliantly. Now everyone would think Charlotte was paranoid, that Jake was dangerous, that the attack had never happened at all. Patricia pulled up in the limousine, her eyes widening at Charlotte's bare feet and Jake's bloody knuckles. They climbed in without explanation, and Charlotte gave her the address to the penthouse. As soon as the privacy screen rose, Charlotte started shaking. "He almost did it," she whispered. "He almost killed me right there in my own office building, and now no one will believe us. He's made it look like I'm losing my mind." Jake pulled her close, feeling the tremors running through her body. His own hands were shaking too, adrenaline crash hitting hard. "We need to call the police, file a report, get this on record." "And say what? That my uncle hired fake security guards to inject me with something, but we lost the evidence? That the real security guard corroborates his story?" Charlotte's laugh was broken. "He's thought of everything, Jake. Every angle. We're not just fighting him anymore. We're fighting his entire constructed reality." She was right. Jake had seen it happen in prison, the way powerful people could shape narratives to their advantage, could make victims look like aggressors, could turn truth into convenient fiction. Robert had money and influence and an entire corporation backing his version of events. What did they have? Nothing but survival and stubborn determination. "Then we don't fight his way," Jake said slowly, an idea forming. "We can't beat him with evidence or lawyers or board votes. He controls all that. But we can beat him with the truth, the real truth told to people who matter." Charlotte looked up at him. "What are you thinking?" "Elizabeth Reyes, Thomas's widow. If we tell her what happened today, what's really going on, she can help us. Robert may control your board and your security, but he can't control Thomas's family. They have no reason to lie for him. Their testimony matters." "But what good does testimony do if we can't prove anything?" "We don't need proof for the court of public opinion. We just need enough doubt, enough questions, that Robert can't quietly kill you without it looking suspicious." Jake's mind was racing now, seeing the strategy. "If we go public with this, if we tell the story of Thomas's poisoning and today's attack, Robert can't make you disappear. Too many people would ask questions, too much scrutiny." Charlotte considered this, hope dawning in her eyes. "You're talking about using the media, about going to war publicly." "I'm talking about surviving, about making sure if Robert tries again, the whole world knows who to blame." Jake squeezed her hand. "It's risky. It'll be ugly. But it might be the only play we have left." "Do it," Charlotte said without hesitation. "Whatever it takes. I'm done hiding. I'm done being afraid." They spent the rest of the car ride planning, calling Elizabeth Reyes, arranging an emergency meeting at Charlotte's penthouse. When they arrived, Lily rushed to greet them, her face pale with worry. "Dad, what happened? You're bleeding, and Charlotte looks—" She stopped, taking in the full picture. "What's going on?" Jake looked at his daughter, at the fear in her eyes, and felt guilt crash over him. He'd promised to keep her safe, to give her a normal life. Instead, he'd dragged her into a billionaire's murder plot, had almost gotten himself killed protecting Charlotte. What kind of father did that? "We need to talk," Jake said quietly. "All of us. About what happens next." Because the truth was, after today, nothing would be the same. Robert had shown his hand. The war between them was no longer secret or subtle. It was open, dangerous, possibly deadly. And Jake Morrison, ex-con warehouse worker, single father trying to do right by his daughter, was in the middle of it with no way out except through. Elizabeth Reyes arrived within the hour, her face etched with concern as Charlotte's assistant ushered her into the penthouse. She took one look at Charlotte's haunted expression and Jake's bloody knuckles and immediately understood that something terrible had happened. "Tell me everything," Elizabeth said, settling onto the couch with the calm determination of someone who'd already survived the worst thing imaginable. Nothing scared her anymore. Thomas was gone. What else could the world take? Charlotte and Jake took turns recounting the morning's events. The meeting with Robert and his attorney, the power outage, the guards with syringes, the chase down 40 floors of emergency stairs. Elizabeth listened without interrupting, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes growing harder with each detail. When they finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Thomas knew." Charlotte leaned forward. "What?" He never said it directly, but in the weeks before he died, Thomas was worried about something. He'd take phone calls late at night and pace in the kitchen, talking too quietly for me to hear. He started writing things down in a notebook he kept in his car. Elizabeth's voice trembled slightly. "The night of the accident, he called me right before picking you up, said if anything happened to him, I should look in the glove compartment, that there was evidence there of something wrong, something dangerous." Jake felt his pulse quicken. "Did you find the notebook?" "The police released the car 2 weeks ago. I couldn't bear to look at it, so I had it towed to our garage. I haven't touched it since." Elizabeth met Charlotte's eyes. "But if there's evidence Thomas collected, evidence that Robert was planning something, it's still there, in that car." Charlotte was already standing, energy returning to her defeated posture. "Where's the garage? We need that notebook now." "Queens, about 40 minutes from here." Elizabeth pulled out her phone. "I'll text you the address. But Charlotte, if Robert finds out you're looking for this, he already tried to kill me today. I'm past worrying about what happens if he finds out." Charlotte's jaw was set with determination. "Jake, can you drive?" "Of course, but we're not going alone. We need backup." Jake looked at Lily, who'd been sitting quietly through the whole conversation, her eyes wide. "Baby, I need you to stay here with Elizabeth. Lock the doors. Don't answer for anyone except me or Charlotte. Can you do that?" Lily nodded, though fear flickered across her face. "Dad, please be careful." "Always am." Jake kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, trying to memorize this moment in case it was the last. He hated leaving her, hated the fear he was putting in her heart, but finding that notebook was their only chance at survival, their only chance at justice for Thomas. Patricia drove them to Queens in tense silence. Jake kept checking the side mirrors, watching for tails, for any sign that Robert had people following them. But the streets remained clear, just normal Tuesday afternoon traffic. Maybe they'd gotten lucky. Maybe Robert thought he'd already won. The garage Elizabeth had mentioned was a small commercial space near the waterfront, the kind of place that stored boats in winter and classic cars year-round. The owner, a gruff man in his 60s named Eddie, recognized Elizabeth's name when Charlotte called. "Mrs. Reyes said you'd be coming. The Lincoln's in Bay 7. Eddie handed Charlotte a key. "Take your time. Lock up when you're done." The garage smelled of motor oil and old leather. Thomas's limousine sat in the dim bay exactly as it had been pulled from the Hudson, the front end crumpled from impact, water damage evident in the warped interior. Looking at it made Jake's chest tight. He could still feel the freezing water, still taste the panic of trying to free Charlotte from the sinking vehicle. Charlotte stood frozen at the sight of it, her hand pressed to her mouth. "I haven't seen it since that night. Haven't wanted to." "You don't have to do this. I can look." Jake moved toward the passenger side, but Charlotte stopped him. "No, I need to." She took a breath and opened the back door, sliding into the seat where she'd almost died. Her hands shook as she reached for the glove compartment. It stuck, swollen from water damage, but finally popped open. Inside was a waterlogged notebook, its pages stuck together, the ink mostly illegible. Charlotte's face fell. "It's ruined. Whatever Thomas wrote, we can't read it." Jake took the notebook carefully, flipping through the damaged pages. Most of the writing had bled into incomprehensible smears, but toward the back, protected by the pages above it, he found something. A page covered in plastic wrap, deliberately preserved. Thomas had known this might end up underwater. He'd prepared for it. The page contained dates, times, and names. Phone calls between Robert and someone named Dr. Marcus Chen, meetings at a clinic in New Jersey, wire transfers to offshore accounts, and at the bottom, underlined 3 times. Potassium chloride, untraceable cardiac arrest, Charlotte is next. "He knew," Charlotte breathed, reading over Jake's shoulder.
Thomas knew Robert was planning to kill me. He was gathering evidence. And Robert found out. That's why Thomas had to die first. Jake's anger burned cold and focused. This is it, Charlotte. This is the proof we need. Thomas documented everything. Charlotte pulled out her phone with shaking hands. I'm calling Detective Rodriguez, the one investigating Thomas's death. She said to contact her if we found anything. But before she could dial, Jake's instinct screamed a warning. He grabbed Charlotte's wrist. Wait, how did Robert know we were at your office this morning? How did his people know exactly when to attack? Charlotte's eyes widened with understanding. Someone's been feeding him information, someone close to me. Your phone, your computer, everything could be compromised. Jake looked around the garage, suddenly feeling exposed. We need to move, now, and we need to go somewhere Robert can't track us. They left through the back exit, Jake carrying the notebook wrapped in his jacket. Patricia was waiting by the limo, but Jake shook his head. We're not taking the car. It might have a tracker. We'll get a cab. Jake, you're being paranoid, Charlotte started, but then her phone rang. She looked at the screen and went pale. It's Robert. Don't answer. She answered anyway, her hand trembling as she raised the phone to her ear. Jake could hear Robert's smooth voice even from 2 feet away. Charlotte, dear, we need to talk about this morning, about your accusations. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Robert's tone was concerned, almost paternal. Why don't you come back to the office? We can sort this out like family. I'm not coming back, and I know what you did. I know everything. Charlotte's voice was stronger than Jake expected. Thomas kept records, evidence. You're not going to get away with this. The line went silent for a long moment. When Robert spoke again, all pretense of warmth was gone. That notebook won't help you. Half the board thinks you're unstable. The police think you're paranoid. Even if you go public, who's going to believe you? The troubled heiress with the ex-con boyfriend making wild accusations against her respected uncle? His name is Jake, and he's more of a man than you'll ever be. Charlotte's hand found Jake's, squeezing tight. We're going to the police with this evidence. We're going to the media. And you're going to prison for what you did to Thomas, for what you tried to do to me. You stupid girl. Robert's voice turned venomous. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I built this company while you were still in boarding school. I won't let you destroy it with your naive idealism and bleeding heart policies. If you won't step aside willingly, I'll remove you, permanently. The call ended. Charlotte stood there, holding the silent phone, her face drained of color. He's not even pretending anymore. He just threatened to kill me. Good, Jake said grimly. That means he's scared. That means we're winning. He flagged down a passing cab, pulling Charlotte inside. We're going to the police station, right now, before Robert can spin this any other way. The precinct was crowded with the usual chaos of a Tuesday afternoon. Drunk and disorderlies sleeping it off on benches. A woman arguing loudly about a parking ticket. Uniformed officers moving through the controlled mayhem with practiced efficiency. Jake approached the desk sergeant, still clutching the notebook. We need to speak with Detective Rodriguez. It's about the Thomas Reyes case. The sergeant picked up a phone, spoke briefly, then gestured toward a hallway. Third door on the left. She's expecting you. Detective Rodriguez was a woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and the tired look of someone who'd seen too much. She stood when they entered, her gaze moving between Charlotte and Jake with obvious recognition. Ms. Ashford, Mr. Morrison, I've been following the news about this morning's incident at your office. Rodriguez gestured to chairs. Why don't you tell me what really happened? Charlotte laid out everything, the meeting with Robert, the attack, the notebook Thomas had hidden. Rodriguez listened carefully, taking notes, her expression unreadable. When Charlotte finished, the detective reached for the notebook. May I? Jake handed it over. Rodriguez examined the preserved page, her eyebrows rising as she read Thomas's careful documentation. She looked up at them, and Jake saw belief in her eyes. Finally, someone who believed them. This is significant. Wire transfers, medical records, documented communication between Robert Ashford and someone who could have provided potassium chloride. Rodriguez set the notebook down carefully. But Ms. Ashford, you need to understand something. Robert Ashford is a very powerful man with very expensive lawyers.
This notebook is evidence, yes, but it's also potentially inadmissible. Chain of custody issues, questions about authenticity, the fact that Thomas Reyes can't testify to verify his own notes. Charlotte's hope crumbled. So it's not enough. I didn't say that. I said it's complicated. Rodriguez leaned forward, her voice lowering. Between you and me? I've suspected Robert was involved since the beginning. The autopsy results never sat right with me. But suspicion isn't proof. What you've given me is a starting point. With this, I can get warrants. Financial records, phone logs, surveillance footage from that New Jersey clinic. I can build a case. How long will that take? Jake asked. Weeks, maybe months. Rodriguez looked apologetic. I know that's not what you want to hear, but that's the reality of building a case against someone like Robert Ashford. I don't have weeks, Charlotte said desperately. He tried to kill me today. He'll try again. Then we need to get you somewhere safe. Protective custody. No. Charlotte stood abruptly. Protective custody means hiding, means letting Robert control the narrative while I'm locked away somewhere. That's not happening. Rodriguez studied her for a long moment. What are you planning to do? Charlotte looked at Jake, and he saw the decision forming in her eyes. The choice between safety and justice, between surviving and living. He knew which one she'd pick. He'd known from the moment she'd confronted Robert at the gala. I'm calling a press conference, Charlotte said. Tomorrow morning. I'm going public with everything. Thomas's murder. The attacks on me. Robert's conspiracy to steal the company and eliminate me. All of it. That's dangerous, Rodriguez warned. You'll be painting a target on your back. The target's already there. At least this way everyone will be watching. Robert can't kill me quietly if I've just accused him of murder in front of 100 reporters. Charlotte's voice was steady with resolve. And maybe, just maybe, someone else Robert has hurt will come forward. Someone with their own story, their own evidence. Power like his doesn't happen in a vacuum. He's done this before. Rodriguez was quiet, considering. Then she nodded slowly. Okay, but I want officers with you. Protection detail, starting now. And Ms. Ashford, when you do this press conference, stick to facts you can prove. Don't speculate. Don't exaggerate. Give me evidence I can use. I will. Charlotte extended her hand. Thank you, Detective, for believing us. I believe in justice. Sometimes that means believing the impossible. Rodriguez shook her hand firmly. Now, let's go catch a murderer. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. the next morning at the Ashford Corporation headquarters. Charlotte's PR team worked through the night preparing statements, coordinating with news outlets, managing the chaos. Jake stayed by Charlotte's side the entire time, watching her transform from terrified heiress into something harder, something unbreakable. Lily was sent to stay with Elizabeth Reyes, somewhere Robert couldn't reach her. Jake hated being separated from his daughter, but he hated the thought of her being in danger more. Elizabeth promised to guard her with everything she had, two mothers protecting their children, bound by tragedy and determination. The night before the conference, Charlotte and Jake sat on the penthouse balcony despite the December cold. The city glittered below them, oblivious to their small war against corruption and murder. I'm scared, Charlotte admitted quietly. Not of dying, I've already almost died once, but of being wrong, of destroying innocent people's lives if I've misread this situation. You haven't misread anything. Robert tried to kill you, multiple times. That's not paranoia. That's fact. Jake took her hand, which had become natural over the past week. And tomorrow, you're going to tell the truth. Whatever happens after that, at least you'll have been honest. What if the truth isn't enough? Then we find more truth. We keep fighting until justice sticks. Jake squeezed her hand. I learned something in prison, Charlotte. The system isn't fair. It's not designed to be. But sometimes, if you're stubborn enough and loud enough, you can force it to do the right thing anyway. Not because it wants to, because it has no other choice. Charlotte leaned her head on his shoulder, and Jake felt the weight of her trust. This woman who'd had everything and lost her safety. This woman who could have run, could have hidden, but chose to fight instead. He admired her more than she'd ever know. When this is over, Charlotte said softly, what happens to us? To you and me and Lily? Jake had been avoiding that question, afraid of the answer. I don't know.
We're from different worlds, Charlotte. You know that. Worlds collide sometimes, create something new. She looked up at him, her green eyes reflecting the city lights. You saved my life, Jake, and somewhere along the way I think I saved yours too. That has to mean something. He wanted to tell her it meant everything, that the last 2 weeks had shown him a version of himself he'd forgotten existed, someone capable of more than survival, someone who could protect and care for someone beyond his daughter, someone who deserved a second chance at love. But tomorrow was too uncertain. Tomorrow, Robert would be watching. Tomorrow, everything could fall apart. So instead, Jake did what felt natural. He kissed her. It was different from the desperate breath he'd forced into her lungs in the frozen river. Different from the near-death panic and survival instinct. This kiss was gentle, human, full of possibility and fear and hope all tangled together. When they pulled apart, Charlotte was crying. Promise me something. Anything. If this goes wrong tomorrow, if Robert wins, promise you'll take Lily and disappear. Use the money I gave you. Start over somewhere safe. Don't let him hurt you because of me. That's not going to happen. Promise me anyway. Jake looked at this woman who'd crashed into his life in a sinking limousine, who'd trusted him with her survival, who'd shown him that jumping into the river could lead somewhere worth reaching. I promise. But I promise something else too. I promise I'm not going anywhere. I promise I'll stand beside you tomorrow and every day after until Robert Ashford pays for what he did. Charlotte kissed him again, softer this time. A seal on promises made. A prayer against the darkness. The morning arrived with cruel clarity, bright winter sun turning the city into glass and steel edges. Jake dressed in one of the suits Charlotte had bought him, armor for the battle ahead. He checked his phone obsessively, reading texts from Lily saying she was safe, reading messages from Detective Rodriguez saying they were ready. Charlotte emerged from her room looking like the CEO she was born to be. Power suit in navy blue, hair pulled back severely. Minimal makeup that made her look older, more authoritative. She'd hidden the fear behind professional competence, but Jake saw it in the way her hands trembled as she adjusted her necklace. How do I look? She asked. Like someone who's about to change the world. They rode down in the private elevator, flanked by the police officers Rodriguez had assigned. The lobby of the Ashford building was packed with reporters, cameras, microphones. A podium had been set up with the company logo behind it, lights positioned for optimal footage. This was it, the moment that would define everything that came next. Robert was already there, Jake noticed with a chill. Standing at the back of the crowd with his lawyer watching with barely concealed rage. He'd known this was coming, had probably spent the night preparing his own counterattack, but he'd shown up anyway, unable to resist watching Charlotte try to destroy him. Charlotte walked to the podium with her head high. The crowd quieted, cameras focusing, reporters leaning forward with predatory attention. Jake stood to her left, close enough to protect her if needed, far enough to not overshadow her moment. Thank you all for coming, Charlotte began, her voice steady and clear. 3 weeks ago, my driver Thomas Reyes died when our limousine crashed into the Hudson River. The official cause was determined to be a heart attack leading to loss of control of the vehicle. I nearly drowned that night and was saved by the man standing beside me, Jake Morrison. She paused, letting that sink in. Jake saw Robert shift position, his jaw tight. What wasn't reported was that Thomas's autopsy revealed trace amounts of potassium chloride in his system, a substance that can induce cardiac arrest, a substance that would have made his death appear natural. Charlotte's voice grew stronger. Thomas's death was not an accident. It was murder, and I believe I was the intended target. The crowd erupted with shouted questions. Charlotte raised her hand for silence. In the weeks following the crash, there have been 2 additional attempts on my life. Yesterday morning, during a scheduled meeting at this very building, armed men posing as security guards attempted to inject me with an unknown substance. Jake Morrison fought them off, and we barely escaped. Evidence of these attacks, including documentation kept by Thomas Reyes before his death, has been provided to the NYPD. More shouting. Cameras swinging toward Robert, catching his expression. The older man's face was a mask of controlled fury, but his eyes promised retribution. I'm here today to state publicly and clearly, I believe my uncle,
Robert Ashford, is responsible for Thomas Reyes's murder and for the attempts on my life. Charlotte's voice didn't waver even as she spoke the words that could never be taken back. I believe he wants me dead so that he can inherit control of the Ashford Corporation and undo the changes I've implemented. I believe he values power and profit over human life, and I believe he will not stop until either I am dead or he is held accountable. The room exploded, reporters screaming questions, cameras flashing, chaos erupting like a dam breaking. Robert was pushing toward the podium, his lawyer trying to hold him back, his face red with rage. "You have no proof," Robert shouted over the din. "This is slander, defamation. I will sue you for everything you have." "Then sue me." Charlotte met his eyes across the crowd. "Because I'm not backing down. I'm not stepping aside. And I'm not dying quietly so you can steal my father's legacy." Detective Rodriguez appeared at Charlotte's side, 2 uniformed officers with her. "Mr. Ashford, I'm going to need you to come with us. We have questions about your relationship with Dr. Marcus Chen and some financial irregularities we've uncovered. I'm not going anywhere without my attorney." Robert's voice was ice, but Jake saw panic flicker beneath the surface. "This is harassment, political persecution of a successful businessman by a mentally unstable woman with a vendetta. That mentally unstable woman just gave us probable cause for a warrant. Your choice is to come voluntarily or be arrested." Rodriguez's tone left no room for argument. "Clock's ticking, Mr. Ashford." Jake watched as Robert's world crumbled around him. The reporters who'd been his allies now recording his humiliation. The police he'd probably tried to buy off standing firm. The niece he'd tried to eliminate staring him down with the same steel her father had been famous for. "This isn't over," Robert hissed as the officers moved to flank him. "You have no idea what you've started, Charlotte. No idea what I'm capable of." "I know exactly what you're capable of," Charlotte said quietly. "You killed a good man. You tried to kill me, and you almost succeeded. But I'm still here, Uncle Robert, and I'm going to make sure you never hurt anyone again." They led him away in handcuffs, his lawyer shouting about rights and illegal procedures. The cameras captured every moment, broadcasting Robert Ashford's downfall to the world. Charlotte swayed slightly, and Jake caught her elbow. "You did it," he whispered. "It's over." "It's not over until he's convicted, until justice is served." But Charlotte's voice was shaky, the adrenaline fading, the reality of what she'd just done settling in. "Jake, I just destroyed my uncle on live television. I just accused him of murder in front of hundreds of witnesses. What if I'm wrong? What if—" "You're not wrong, and you're not alone." Jake pulled her away from the podium, away from the reporters still shouting questions, into a quiet corner of the lobby. "You were brave in there. Braver than most people ever have to be. Your father would have been proud." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. "I hope so. God, I hope so." The weeks that followed were a media circus. Robert's arrest made national headlines. The investigation uncovered more evidence, things even Charlotte hadn't known about. Falsified financial records, bribes to board members, communication between Robert and Dr. Marcus Chen detailing the plan to poison Thomas and stage Charlotte's death as a car accident. Other victims came forward, people Robert had silenced or threatened over the years. His empire of corruption unraveled thread by thread. Through it all, Jake stayed by Charlotte's side, protected her from overzealous reporters, held her when the stress became too much, reminded her why she'd chosen to fight instead of flee. Lily came home after 2 weeks, returning to the penthouse with Elizabeth Reyes, who'd become like a grandmother to her. The 4 of them, bound by tragedy and survival, formed an unlikely family. Jake took the supervisor position at the warehouse. Turned out protecting a billionaire heiress made for a hell of a reference. He and Lily found an apartment in a better neighborhood, using Charlotte's money to give his daughter the life she deserved. But they spent most evenings at the penthouse anyway, drawn back to the woman who'd changed their world. The trial took place in spring, 6 months after that morning in the frozen Hudson. Jake sat in the courtroom beside Charlotte, holding her hand as witness after witness testified to Robert Ashford's crimes. Elizabeth Reyes spoke about Thomas's final days, his fear and determination to protect Charlotte. Detective Rodriguez presented the evidence they'd gathered. Even Victor Chen, the security guard, turned state's witness in exchange for a reduced sentence, describing how Robert had orchestrated the entire scheme. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Murder, attempted murder, conspiracy, embezzlement, fraud. Robert Ashford was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. Charlotte cried when they read the verdict. Relief and grief and justice all tangled together. Jake wrapped his arms around her and let her sob against his chest, the same chest where she'd once rested after nearly drowning. They'd come full circle, from survival to justice, from strangers to something far deeper. "It's really over," Charlotte whispered. "He can't hurt anyone anymore." "It's over," Jake agreed. "Now we figure out what comes next." What came next surprised everyone, especially Jake. Charlotte stepped down as CEO of the Ashford Corporation, handing control to a management team she trusted. She started a foundation instead, the Thomas Reyes Foundation for Second Chances. It provided job training and support for ex-convicts trying to rebuild their lives, for single parents struggling to provide for their children, for anyone who'd made mistakes and deserved another opportunity. Jake became the foundation's first director of outreach. Turned out his experience navigating the criminal justice system, his understanding of survival and redemption, made him perfect for the job. He helped hundreds of people who reminded him of himself, people who just needed someone to believe in them. Lily thrived in her new school, made the basketball team, started talking about college. She loved telling people that her dad was a hero, that he'd saved Charlotte Ashford's life and helped put a murderer in prison. The shame that had haunted her for so long faded, replaced by pride. And Charlotte, freed from corporate politics and assassination attempts, became herself again. Or maybe became herself for the first time. She laughed more, relaxed into the relationship with Jake that had been building since that first kiss on the balcony. Became a second mother to Lily, filling the void Sarah had left. On the anniversary of the crash, they all went to the bridge. Charlotte, Jake, Lily, and Elizabeth. They stood where Jake had jumped into the frozen water and looked down at the river that had almost claimed Charlotte's life. "I come here sometimes," Charlotte admitted, "when I need to remember how close I came to losing everything. How lucky I am that you were walking by that night." Jake wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "I was thinking about that recently, about all the tiny decisions that led to that moment. If I'd worked late, if I'd taken a different route home, if I'd been 5 minutes earlier or later, we would have never met. You'd have drowned, and I'd still be loading trucks and hating my life." "Fate," Elizabeth said softly. "That's what Thomas always believed in. That the universe puts people where they're supposed to be, when they're supposed to be there. You were supposed to save Charlotte, Jake. And she was supposed to save you right back." Lily leaned against her father's other side. "So what you're saying is, sometimes jumping into the river is exactly the right thing to do." Jake looked at his daughter, at Charlotte, at the life he'd built from the ashes of that freezing December night. He thought about the kiss that had started as survival and became something infinitely more precious. He thought about redemption and second chances and the power of stubborn courage in the face of evil. "Yeah," he said, smiling. "Sometimes jumping into the river saves more than one life. Sometimes it saves everyone." Charlotte took his hand, squeezing tight. They stood together at the place where their story began, where death had been cheated and justice had been born. The water below looked peaceful in the spring sunshine, no longer a frozen tomb, but just a river, just a passage from one shore to another. Jake Morrison had spent 12 years believing he didn't deserve happiness, that his mistakes had disqualified him from anything but survival and penance. But Charlotte had shown him something different. She'd shown him that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing, every single day, to be better. To love and protect and stay, even when it was terrifying. Especially when it was terrifying. He'd jumped into a frozen river to save a stranger, and in doing so, he'd saved himself. 2 years later, Jake and Charlotte stood in a small chapel in Queens, the same one where he'd met Elizabeth Reyes and received her blessing. Lily stood beside them as maid of honor, wearing a dress that made her look impossibly grown up. Elizabeth sat in the front row, crying happy tears for the family that had formed from tragedy. When the officiant asked if anyone objected to the union, The silence was filled with certainty. No objections, no doubts. Just love and gratitude and the stubborn determination to build something beautiful from the wreckage of that winter night. "I do," Charlotte said, her voice clear and strong. "I do," Jake echoed, meaning it with every fiber of his being. They kissed, and it tasted like redemption, like second chances earned through courage and pain, like jumping into freezing water and trusting that you'll find the strength to swim back to shore. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and gentle, nothing like the bitter cold of that December night. Jake held Charlotte close, his daughter beaming beside them, and thought about all the small miracles that had led them here. A single decision to not look away when someone needed help, a willingness to jump when everyone else just watched. Sometimes the river is dark and cold and terrifying. Sometimes you jump anyway. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, you don't drown. You save someone, you get saved in return, and you build a life worth living on the other side. Jake Morrison had learned that lesson in a frozen river, and he carried it with him always. Not just the memory of saving Charlotte Ashford, but the knowledge that every day was a choice. Every day, you could be the person who jumps or the person who watches, the person who fights or the person who hides. He'd chosen to jump, and it had made all the difference.